The following program does not have a normal intro because I was really too busy smoothing other things over to get it done. So, Ori? Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the following program, which is now actually viewer's discretion, not the following program. So, welcome to viewer's discretion. I'm your host, Joe Neighbor, aka Good Lawgic. That was lousy. Wow, that was bad. Wow, so bad. How are you all doing? Hope your weekend's been going phenomenally well. Phenomenally well. Phenomenally. My weekend, thank God, has been going, I would say, solid 9 out of 10. Solid 9 out of 10. I had all my single children here in my home this weekend, which is not a common thing because usually my middle son is away. So he was here. And we have all these phenomenal debates that are going on. Everyone's very, very excited about January 6th. In case you missed it, happy January 6th. Hope that your January 6th was a day that was special, that touched your heart. I actually put out a poll asking whether you think January 6th is a day we should commemorate in infamy, in glory, not commemorate, but should be remembered or forgotten. I'm kind of curious about that one. That is your first. Shavua Tov. You're first. Well done. Thank you. Thank you very much. Welcome. Welcome, Monk in Training. Anyhow, apparently, when I put out a poll on locals, I was trying to decide, should I cover Destiny's debate with Nick about January 6th? Because, in honor of January 6th, or should I cover Destiny and Krasenstein with Alex Jones? And it was decidedly in favor of going after Nick. Now, I mentioned there that from the limited amounts I saw, when I was watching Destiny with Alex Jones, this was like, it's hard for me to explain to someone who's not an attorney how frustrating it was, because both sides were throwing out stuff there which just have no tethering in law or actual understanding as to what some of the cases they were mentioning were about. And it was so frustrating that I'm just like, it's just craziness. Like, there's a lot of answers to what the pro prosecution side was saying. And I didn't feel that Alex is really properly equipped, as much as I respect him and love him as an entertaining figure who's very insightful. But when it comes to understanding the law and legal principles behind these things, he was a little out of his depth. Now, Glenn Greenwald certainly seemed to understand a little bit more, and so he was helpful in sitting there and citing fallacies that were being thrown out left and right. But it was so hefker. It was so crazy that it's just like, I don't even know where to begin in breaking down the wrongness here, because both sides seem to really not understand what they're talking about. So that was frustrating. So I'm far happier to dissect the discussion between Nick and Destiny. I don't know how good a job Nick did or how good a job Destiny did. I watched 10 minutes of this. 10 minutes. So I can't tell you how well either of them performed. Some say that this was prep for Alex. Maybe it was. I think Destiny is has a lot weaker understanding of law than he possibly appreciates. I think that he's a classic example of Dunning-Kruger, where he understands some, but there's a lot of Dunning-Kruger going on there. But we'll analyze that. January 1st, remember, because it's my birthday. January 6th, happy birthday, Pammy! Happy birthday, Pamela. Congratulations. 21 years old. Finally, now you can drink. Very exciting, Pam. Happy birthday. All right. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Let's do it. Let's just do it. Here we go. Let's check out Destiny and Nick. Whoa, that's wrong. That's not the right screen. That was going to give you a headache in a hurry. Much better. All right. I will tell you this. I noticed even in the first few minutes, he gives Nick a camera. I don't get camera. It's very frustrating trying to debate when you're not on camera. The other side is. It actually is. it's a decided advantage because people can't. There's just a lot that gets lost when you're only hearing one side and seeing and hearing the other side. I was noticing that when I was watching this, but anyhow, I digress. Let's get started.
But I also think that Trump likely should have criminal immunity from this.
Every claim, all the major claims they made were lies. Giuliani is literally just filed a settlement with that Ruby Freeman saying that, like, yeah, I kind of lied, but like that's my First Amendment right.
And you can't ask us a question about it.
What you're saying, you're saying that the electorate slate, when they said we are the duly elected electors, and it's not true.
Yeah, man. I hear we're talking.
Yeah, that's not fraud. That's not fraud. Inherent in fraud is that you're trying to deceive someone when everyone knows what you're doing. That cannot be fraud. But
January 6th, we're talking insurrection, we're talking 14th Amendment, Trump, all this good stuff.
Maybe, yeah. I'm just kind of trying to see if there's any legal arguments out there that I'm not aware of.
All of them.
All of them, yeah.
I'm just kidding. I don't know what you're aware of. So why don't you give me a rundown of what you're thinking, and then I'll pop into, kind of my thoughts on it and see where we go.
Sure. So I guess centered on January 6th or the events leading up to it, my contention was that I think that it was obviously in a attempted rebellion, attempted coup. I think that the
doubtful
elector slates plan that was kind of hatched up with Eastman. I think that all of the alleged election fraud that Trump and his associates tried to pressure election officials into accepting to overturn their election results. And then I think the way that Trump, Eastman, and Giuliani tried to capitalize on the chaos of the day to continue to push the vote back, I think all pretty convincingly contribute to what I would call, broadly speaking, an attempted coup. More specifically, I would say
attempted coup. It's an attempted coup. God, these are, so I'm just using words I sort of understand, but don't really
support the indictments by Smith and probably the RICO case in Georgia.
If in fact the participants are being pushed to do something that everyone believes is legal, so then it's not an attempted coup. So, assuming arguendo that events had unfolded differently on January 6th, and Pence had recognized that, hey, I do have more authority than just sitting here like a game show host calling out slates of electors, but to take these secondary slates and say, I've got two sets of electors here, and presented it that way, that would be consistent with the Constitution. Now, that doesn't turn it into a coup. That's what you're not. Coup implies that you're ignoring the governing law, and the governing law, if it's unknown which way is actually accurate, you're not ignoring it. You're simply doing your best to comply with it, which is not a coup. That's like saying that throwing aside the slates of electors was a coup. Why is that not a coup? Why is ignoring these slates of electors not a coup? Now you're going to say because they weren't certified by the Secretary of State. But as far as what his duty is, his job is, if he's supposed to be calling out all these slates of electors, well, in that case, which arguably was his job, irrespective of whether or not they're certified by a Secretary of State. So in that case, he's failing to do his job. And in so failing, he is engaging in a coup to give Biden the election. So that's why the term coup, which implies there's an intent to do something illegal that's not compliant with governing law, that's the issue you have with using the term coup, which he will use willy-nilly, at least during the first 10 minutes of this. Why is Nick and Destiny background same bookshelf? I don't see that. They look like two different bookshelves.
But yeah, it's broadly where I'm at. We can raise your focus on any of those if you want.
Okay, well, the first question I have is, so it's an attempted coup. How? What was the goal that would make it a coup?
Heck. Sorry about that.
It would have been.
So he's trying to walk him into
from a broad level,
that.
Donald Trump using undemocratic means to try to entrench his power, to circumvent the will.
You don't mean undemocratic, you mean unconstitutional.
people. On more,
And
I
there's
guess,
a key
precise, like,
distinction.
conspiratorial grounds, it would have been him taking knowingly false information to election officials in an attempt for them to change their votes. It would have been him trying to threatening to fire Rosen if he wouldn't sign a bullshit letter saying the DOJ supported his false claims. It would have been the request for Pence to flip the vote. And it would have been the fraud that was committed when the false electors in 7 different states claimed that they were the duly elected electors to transmit their votes to Congress. All of these things, I think, would, yeah.
I don't know that they claim that they're the duly elected electors. In fact, many of them said and several of them, from what I understand, they said depending on what happens with respect to various outcomes in the future. And they were trying to cut deadline. They were trying to make sure they were protecting the potentiality that if in fact there would be found to be fraud in their respective state, that they wouldn't be precluded by procedural issues that they failed to timely sign off on them prior to a deadline date that was written in their own state legislature.
And then I can be
Sure.
more precise or more macro if you want, I guess.
No, I mean, let's just go in on it. Let's start from the back. The false electors.
Mm-hmm.
The false electors have no power to become a slate of actual electors outside of an accepted reading by Mike Pence, right? Like he would have to, in theory, accept that slate of electors.
Yeah.
And the only way he gets to that slate of electors is if there is a proper objection levied while reading the original slate of electors. The objection is considered, the objection is accepted, and then the alternate slate of electors or the false electors are read in as an alternative, right? Okay, so how is that a fraud that is commit on anybody at all? Because it requires a constitutional process by which it would happen.
Because the claims of those electors were false. The electors were not duly elected.
I don't know that they said duly elected. I don't know that they said that.
Be representatives of their state.
That's an assumption. I think it varies. To be fair, I think it varies from one state to another as to what they wrote. Like, I don't think it was uniform across the 6 or 7 states that they had the alternate slate of electors.
I believe on some of them, well, because they weren't, because the process by which a state legislature chooses their electors, has them meet in the Capitol building, sign off on their electors, and then transmit their votes to NARA. That process wasn't followed.
Okay.
Sure. That process wasn't followed because they were not certified by the state legislature. But hypothetically, if the slate of electors originally certified was withdrawn, now whether or not this can actually happen, I mean, it was broadly stated by a bunch of people on the right that they could definitely recall their slate of electors and do a new one if presented proper information.
Correct.
I'm not quite convinced that that's possible because there's not an obvious mechanism.
Not a good place to seed ground there, Nick. Because it's something that's so unknown. It's not a good place to seed ground because he likely will try latching onto that. But
Mechanism to do it, but there's not a mechanism that says you can't either. So we're in kind of uncharted territory. So I have a hard time finding that's a.
I don't know what you mean uncharted territory. There is a duly slated. There is a.
that's what I'm saying. Now he's going to be that much more confused. All you're doing is you're giving this person who doesn't really understand precisely what you're talking about an opportunity to find a home in another source of a new source of confusion. He's talking about whether or not it's legal, whether or not there's a process for which a state to undo their first certification with the second certification, which probably varies from one state to another, whether or not such a process exists. And the question is, in the absence of there being something in their explicit in their own state legislature, we're talking about state X, Pennsylvania, okay, that if they would if after being certified and having a slate sent in, let's say they realize, oh my God, we counted 200,000 votes that were completely bogus. And without those votes, Biden loses. Is there a process that they legally can now undo it, or is there not a process? Well, that might be the case in Pennsylvania. Might be the case that they do have that possibility based on their state legislative, their state voting laws, in comparison to Michigan, where if the same thing had happened, they would not have such a process. And even if they made a mistake and screwed up, once they screwed up, it's already a done deal. So that probably varies from one state to another whether or not such a process exists. And the question would come down as to, like, if there's no such process, can something be invented on the spot in order to remedy the situation under the local state law? And that would probably take examining the state voting laws of each of the states. But now the question as to whether or not it could be remedied afterwards is just a brand new thing that he's introducing to Destiny here, who does not understand the question in the first place. So that's why I wouldn't have brought it up here.
A duly elected slate of electors that transmits their electoral votes. They all sign the document. They say that we are authorized to be representatives of the state. We met in the Capitol building and did this, and then they sign that and they transmit that to NARA. The false slates of electors that were organized in 7 states by Trump and his campaign were very clearly not true electors, even though they attested that they were. They did not meet in the Capitol buildings, even though many of them attested that they had when they signed it. All of this is fraud. You're literally signing to an attest.
It's not fraud. It's not fraud because everyone knows that they are an alternate slate that's not certified by their own state. In order for something to be fraud, there has to be misrepresentation. If the other party knows or should knows the truth of the true fact, you try saying that situation is that this house that I'm selling you is blue and it's yellow all over the place. And you sit there swearing to the person, oh, it's blue. And the guy's like, wow, it's a blue house. Oh, okay. And he knows or should know that that is not a true thing. That there's no fraud. There's no misrepresentation because there's an expectation that the person actually knows the truth. I mean, it's sitting there in plain sight for him. So when he's sitting here and saying this is fraud, which is a term that the left loves to use, and Destiny in particular, when he talks about this, he keeps falling back into this fraud. The reason fraud is terrible, the reason fraud can have a criminal connotation behind it, which is they're desperate to find some level of criminality here, and that's why they try finding a home in the term fraud, is because it's the reason this is not criminal is because you're not successfully deceiving someone to get something. There's no tricking of anyone. And the fact that these were alternate slates of electors was public knowledge. Everybody knew this. So if Pence had chosen to recognize the alternate slate electors, it's not because he would have been ignorant of the fact that they were a second set of electors, not because he's ignorant of the fact that the Secretary of State from State X decided to confer votes on Biden, not on the Biden electors rather than the Trump electors. It's because he recognizes that there's a flaw in the process that came from State X. But it's not that he's acting with ignorance, that he's been tricked by this alternate slate of electors. And hence, there's no fraud that's happening here because everyone has full knowledge of the facts.
Attesting to a document. And then I believe it'd also be conspiracy, or when you're telling somebody else to commit a crime as well, or communicating with another person to tell them to commit a crime as well.
If there's a crime, and there's no crime of fraud here, but he's not understanding that.
Or like criminal activities, yeah?
This is an easy thing to say, yeah, because there is a process by which this is done, created by state legislatures. However, the state legislatures have plenary authority over how they choose electors, right?
Correct.
Can we agree on that?
Yep, I agree.
Okay, so if a state has plenary authority on how it chooses electors, presumably a state would have plenary authority on how it recalls and selects new electors.
Yep.
So if the state were to have its original slate of electors rejected, the state could, in theory, certify a new slate of electors, no matter.
He's fixating on his whole thing as far as trying to find an answer whether or not they can fix it after the fact. Because what he's basically saying is that he's going to come to the fact that the alternate slate of electors were basically put in there in order to meet a statutory deadline, not to try and trick anyone. But I don't really love this line of attack with someone who's as easily confused on this issue as Destiny certainly seems to be.
Matter what process was followed at all, and having a ready slate of electors sent in before the constitutional deadline for the electors to arrive would allow the state to authorize that slate of electors, no matter how they were formed. Because they have plenary authority, no one would be able to question it.
We're skipping a lot of the things, though. The state wasn't involved in any of this. It was Trump and his henchmen, right?
But
Like,
it
for instance,
has
I
to
could
be
say,
involved.
Even the way he chooses the term henchman is henchman. It's like you picture like the goons from like the original Batman series who were dressed in a costume similar to the Penguin or to Catwoman. It's like they're all wearing tiger stripes while they're sitting there going kapowie, kablam, or other stuff. That's what henchmen are. It's like stupid, idiotic bullies who are just following orders from the mastermind, the henchmen.
well, we did. We just said the state would have a process whereby they would recall their electors, and then the state would.
I didn't say they would have a process by which they would do it. I said the state has plenary authority to choose a slate of electors, which means that no one could question the state legislature's ability to do so, including, in theory, the state's ability to just certify this new slate of electors.
Yeah, but the state didn't do that, though, right?
Well, they didn't. So, but because, of course, they didn't do it. But if they had done it, they could.
This is why Nick never should have gone down this whole road. He should have just attacked the issue of his usage of the word fraud. Because in actuality, when they were acting on December 6th or December 9th and putting in as them being a slate of electors, they don't know what's going to happen between then and January 6th. So once you're coming now to January 6th and it hasn't been overturned by the arguments that Nick is presenting, well, in that case, why are you pushing forward for Pence? Which there are other bases to push forward for Pence to take actions other than the actions he took.
Like me forging a signature and saying, like, if my mom had signed this, I could go on the field trip. So I just signed it because maybe in the future she'll sign it. But my mom didn't sign the field trip slip, right? Like, I agree with you that, like, so I believe people want to go to Hawaii, for instance.
Only if you went on the field trip.
Well, but that's what he tried to do. He tried to go on the field trip, but they didn't let him on the bus because Pence said no, right?
That's not quite comparable because if you could have presented this thing as an alternative and you just didn't present it because it wasn't acceptable, so you didn't go on the field trip, not because you presented it and they're like, well, this is a forgery, you can't go, but because the original option was taken. The alternative was never explored, so the false slate of electors doesn't matter.
I'm following you on part of this process, but I'm focused on the fraud part, on the criminal aspect.
Which is why he should be meeting him on that ground and basically saying every time you use the word fraud, that's an inaccurate word. It's a grossly inaccurate word, and it's purposefully being used in order to portray criminality that does not exist because you're desperate to find some type of criminality, which clearly under the law does not exist. In fact, that's why he's not been charged with fraud. Why has he not been charged with fraud? What do we think, that Jack Smith is an idiot? I mean, yes, I think he is, but you don't think he is. So why didn't he charge him with fraud? It's because there is no justifiable claim of fraud.
Say, for instance, 7 citizens got together in Georgia and they were like, we don't agree with the election results. We're going to fill out what we believe is our slate of electors, and we're going to transfer.
As I explained moments ago, fake electors are not an issue of fraud because fraud implies that you are doing something to trick someone else. That's a necessary element to there being fraud. You can say they're illegitimate electors. You can say they're unsupported by law electors, but that's a different thing from saying fraud. And the reason he's choosing the term fraud is because it implies criminality. And the point is, there can be no criminality when everybody is aware that this alternate slate of electors is an alternate slate of electors that's not recognized by the state or the Secretary of State. So there's no fraud of deceiving someone, which is a necessary element to fraud. That's my point.
Submit that to Congress. In that case, I think everything you say logically follows. They would look at them as they go to certify the vote. They'd look at it and they go, okay, well, you guys aren't the real ones. We tossed you out. Or if they say, wow, we actually are changing our mind. We're going to withdraw the electors. We're going to make these guys the official electors. I think everything that you say follows. Everything is fine. The problem, though, is that those people that submitted it were private citizens. They weren't empowered by any state body or any state legislature, and they misrepresented. They fraudulently certified that they were duly elected and that they had met in the state state buildings and that they had filled them out and transmitted them from there. All of that is fraud.
What-
No, not a
what about
single.
that is
No,
different?
that's not factually accurate. Not a single person thought that that's what happened. Nobody thought that. We all knew that they were not certified.
From the scenario you just brought up with the independent citizens doing it.
Because they attested that they were empowered by the state to do it, and they weren't. They had no authorization from the state. They were just private citizens.
That's not
It
true.
would be the exact
This is
same.
not true.
Their authority to send those votes would be the same as me and 6 other streamers getting together and just sending our votes from Florida. We have absolutely no assembly. We can't do that. Or we could, but we can't say that we're like duly elected by the state to do so, or that we met in the Capitol building if we didn't. That's all fraud.
He's just making facts now. That's just not what happened. Certainly not the fraud perpetrated by the left. Indeed.
That's like super clear and easy fraud, I think.
See, I disagree that it's fraud, because the idea would be, if you believe that there's election fraud, right? This is presuming that these people
Andy,
genuinely believe.
How you doing, brother? It's been a while since I've seen you. Good to see you. Is it fraudulent to have 2 different set of electors? No. Perhaps one from the U.S., the other from Sweden. What? Sweden? What if they said the U.S. is kind of weak and the Swedish one needs me? What? No. The point is that it's the state's electors. That's the point. The whole reason why were they doing this? Everyone knows why they were doing this. The reason that they had an alternate slate of electors was in case that there was the fraud in the ballot counting was exposed, that there would not be a technical deficiency in the statutory deadline, because each state has a deadline. I just want to remind you all what was happening in November and December of 2020. So we had all these different election results that were coming out and all sorts of talk about, each state was doing their own certification, including these battleground questionable states where some of the election results were certainly being hotly disputed. And there was questions as to whether or not these issues would expose that the votes that were being certified were actually inaccurate and that Biden had not won this particular state or that particular state. Yet each state has a deadline under their own state law. Usually, I think some of them were December 9th, some were December 12th, some were December 16th, but in early to mid-December, by which they must put forward their slate of electors. Otherwise, they have no electors to send forward. So if that's what the statute required, and now it's December 6th, today is our state's deadline, and we have a question, we have an issue, that there still is disputes over whether or not the state of Michigan actually is putting forward the right slate of electors, the duly elected slate of electors, even though it's being recognized by the governor and Secretary of State Dana Nessel as being the duly elected slate of electors. We're hopeful that the inaccuracies will be rectified before January 6th. Well, what happens if 2 weeks later on December 20th, it is remedied, it is recognized? Now we say, oh, Trump is supposed to win, but there was no slate of electors, and that under the state law, it had to be done by December 6th. So in case that happens, most of these electors are signing off saying, in case that happens, we are signing off on this today before the deadline, so we don't have an issue with there being a failure to, because otherwise there's that slate of electors. In theory, that state would have no electors go forward. And they were like, we don't want that to happen. We're expecting that the issues with the election in our state are going to be remedied before January 6th. And we're concerned that Trump's votes are going to be tossed out because they're going to say, well, whoops, we were wrong. Trump actually won this state, but you can't send the electors because under the state deadline, you had to do it 2 weeks ago. So that's why they were trying to avoid that problem. That's why you have these alternate slate electors. That's why Dana Nessel is trying to prosecute the alternate slate electors as such an evil, vile, disgusting human being. Because everyone knows what was going through their minds. Everyone knows why they were doing what they were doing. For them to report as if there was some sort of coup or insurrection is so disingenuous. It's so corrupt. It's so self-serving. It is so 1,000% self-serving of we are the ones in power, we're the ones who are strong, and we're going to clamp down on anyone who fights against the narrative that we're putting out there. It is so gross and disgusting that it's stomach-wrenching. So, but that's what was happening. For those of you who may have forgotten, that's what was happening in December of 2020. Happened in Nixon v. Kennedy in Hawaii. That's true. I dislike analogies for arguments. All right. Someone help Joe. Help Joe with what? Oh. From my understanding, each state has 2 sets of electors depending on which state party wins the popular vote in the state. Am I misunderstanding this? Well, basically, it's which electors have the opportunity to cast their ballots. So this party wins, and now that party has the opportunity. There are electors from each party. In theory, a third party could win, and there are preset electors from that party to come forward and put forward their votes, and they are expected to vote for their guy. But there is such a concept as faithless electors, where sometimes, and that was what happened, we saw in 2016, that I think there were a couple of faithless electors who said, I'm not voting for Trump, even though I'm a Republican. And there was a whole push to get a whole bunch of them to go on, to hop on board with that. Trump committed fraud because Destiny said so. It's just otherwise it's homophobic, transphobic, racist, sexist, and anti-immigrant, probably. His side in a nutshell. Pretty much. That's pretty much it right there.
There's election fraud. They genuinely believe that the slate of electors that was sent and accepted is false based on the fraud that was committed. Therefore, they're saying we are actually the slate of electors that would have occurred. Therefore, we're going to submit this alternate slate of electors to the vice president. And if our state withdraws the original slate of electors and accept us, there we go. We have it, right?
Yeah, but now you're talking about vigilantism. You're trying to
That's not
justify
vigilantism.
Yeah, of course. It's like saying, like, if I really didn't kill that guy and I got sentenced to prison, well, obviously I'm not going to show up for the warrant. I'm not going to jail. I'm going to flee from the police.
No,
I'm going to do whatever I can to stay in jail.
Nothing like that at
I don't think I
all.
actually killed the guy. You can argue that, like, sure, he's, I don't know if that would be obstruction.
Nothing of the sort.
That's exactly what you're saying, because they committed fraud. They signed documents that were
keeps coming back to
knowingly
this criminal
false.
fraud.
Okay, the documents didn't
No,
say we attest
it
that
didn't.
there is a voter fraud. They said that we are the duly elected slate of
Nope.
electors. That was a lie.
That's
They
not
said that
true.
we met in the Capitol building to transmit these. That's a lie. These are 2 instances of fraud. They might have believed genuinely that voter fraud had occurred, but that doesn't mean that they can lie and perjure themselves on other documents. The same as if I don't think I deserve that speeding ticket, I can't outrun a cop to try to escape him. Like, I can't justify a crime because I think that it's not fair. There's vigilantism.
Except that if, in theory, the state were to withdraw its original slate of electors, which was the plan in all of these states, that the state would review and withdraw their slate of electors based on evidence of fraud that they were going to be presented or were being presented or believed in, then they would have plenary authority to accept this new slate of electors, which would make it immediately not illegal.
Is there any other instance we can imagine where you can retroactively?
There are differences. I have to be intellectually honest. I do think there are differences, and as I recall, there was that the state of Hawaii itself was unsure about their outcome, so that's why there was a very different situation. And Nixon, who I believe had originally won the state, ultimately agreed to give the state over to Kennedy. That's my recollection.
Undo fraud.
So it's not really the same.
Fraud only exists if you fraudulently induce a result that provides either a benefit to you or a detriment to someone else.
No shot. That can't be the case. I don't.
This is why I said it's Dunning-Kruger. It's Dunning-Kruger on the law.
We can look up the criminal statutes. Wait, you're telling me? Hold on. To be clear, you're saying fraud is only fraud if it works?
No.
Fraud is only fraud.
Attempted fraud if it doesn't work. There can be attempted fraud, but you can't have attempted fraud. You cannot have attempted fraud if, in fact, if the other side knows the facts that you're trying to deceive them about. That's not even attempted fraud, and you know that they know. Everyone knows that they know. That's not attempted fraud.
Fraud if you induce a benefit or yes, actually induce a benefit or induce a detriment through a knowing misrepresentation.
Wait, so if I falsely sign a check, if I
attempted fraud, sure, but a fraud requires the deprivation of property right from someone or the increase of property right to you through a false statement. Yeah.
So if I were to mis-sign a check, if I were to fraudulently sign a check and try to cash that at a bank and the bank catches me, I haven't committed any crime because they didn't cash the check.
An attempted fraud. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, in that case, I'm sorry. You can amend all my prior statements then, I guess, to attempted fraud. Does that meaningfully change the argument, or?
Well, sure. It meaningfully changes the argument because the question is, is it a fraud if it's legal?
All right, Andy the Game Maker was clarifying for me in a text message here what he meant by the whole Sweden thing. That was a destiny That was a smack at destiny. Gotcha. Okay, that's why I was so confused.
Legal to do the thing.
But it wasn't legal. You're saying they could retroactively.
Why is it not legal?
Because they weren't the duly. They attested to. They signed saying we were empowered by the state to do this, and they weren't empowered by the state to do this. It didn't happen.
But the state
could in the future do a new one and then choose them, but at the time when they signed, and they didn't, right? Well, actually,
Okay.
because if we're going to do the retroactive game, then I mean they didn't. So then you agree then it must be fraud since the state didn't do it.
No, this is okay. So you presented this.
Get into the whole thing as far as knowledge of both parties, please, Nick. For the love of God, put this to bed.
Analogy of going to a bank with a false check, right?
Yeah.
What if you went up to a bank with a note that said,
What if the teller knows that it's not you? Is it fraud? What if everyone knows that it's not you? That's the. Is there fraud?
I'd really like it if you guys gave me $50,000 and you hand that to the bank.
Yeah.
And the bank says no. Have you committed a fraud?
No, of course not.
What if you said, I think you owe me $50,000. Will you please give it to me right now? And you put that on the note and you hand it to the bank. Is that a fraud?
They'd probably call the cops on you, but no, that's not a fraud. No, I don't think so.
They wouldn't call the cops on you for that.
Well, they would
just
because
say
you
no.
look like a bank robber. But no, I'm joking. Yeah, they wouldn't. Yeah, they're not going to.
It's not a fraud.
Yeah,
though,
you haven't committed
right?
any crime. Correct. Yeah.
Okay, so you present an option to the bank. It doesn't take the option. What is illegal about that?
I don't know if you've
He's getting
committed
there.
any
He's
fraud
getting
or
there.
attempted fraud. You just said, give me $50,000. What if here's a question. What if you went to a notary and you got a signed piece of paper saying, Nick Rakita says that he will give me $50,000. And here's his signature that I forged. And here's my signature. And then you take it to the bank and you ask for $50,000.
If the bank knows that it's not true, then it's not fraud. And that's what happened here. It's such a ridiculous analogy.
Is that fraud?
Well, if you forge my signature, that's a different question, right?
Is it?
Did they forge someone else's
100%.
signature?
Well, no, but I mean, they signed something attesting to a false statement. Okay, what if I go to a notary, I get a notarized document, I said, Nick Rakita says he's going to give me $50,000. Here's a promissory note where he says he's going to give me this.
He just said promissory. He didn't say promissory. He said promissory. Promissory?
Then they'd either, I guess, give you the $50,000 or not. But that would be on the bank because.
But it would be attempted fraud, right?
To answer your question, the answer is no. You cannot. The difference between misrepresentation and fraud is that fraud has the scienter of intent. So misrepresentation is when you mislead someone, but you're not trying to deceive them. So you mislead someone. That's what makes a misrepresentation. And ultimately, we learn later on that you misled them, but there was no intent to deceive them. That would be misrepresentation. The fraud, the only difference between misrepresentation and fraud is that fraud has what's called in Latin scienter. That's what they always teach law students, that you have the intent to misrepresent something for your own personal, to their detriment or for your own personal benefit. Notary makes no difference. I don't know why. This is like what a layperson thinks. And no, they did not forge a signature of the Secretary of State or Governor. That's exactly the point.
Right? If I have this like a notarized, if I attest to this, if I bring an affidavit and I lie
grab
on it about who okayed something, this is attempted
Like
fraud.
a notary is just a recognition of the signature that's on the page. So if you notarize your signature saying Nick Rakita says he's going to give me $50,000, you give that to a bank, they're going to say, so? Like, why would they give you $50,000 based on them saying I would give it to you?
Okay, sure. What if I came in with a check that I filled out addressed to me from you, I guess?
But what if you
I filled that check out for you and I said,
but what if you were wearing a red shirt? What if you were wearing a blue shirt? What if your shirt, what if the teller was colorblind and couldn't tell whether you were wearing a red or blue shirt?
be $50,000.
You'd have to forge my signature
Okay.
on that check, right?
Yeah, I guess. I'm trying to think of something that would make it analogous. The fraudulent part is
that's
that
the problem, isn't it? Because there isn't an analogy because they didn't say anybody else did it. They just said we are the duly authorized electors.
No. The problem, I can't think of an analogy off the top of my head because it's so obviously it's illegal. It's obviously fraud. They claimed that the state did something that it didn't. that's fraud. And then they signed a paper saying that the state said something that it didn't, which in my opinion is a little analogous to a check, but they signed a paper saying the state said that we are the duly elected electors. They weren't. And they said that they met in the Capitol building to transmit their votes. They didn't. They weren't even allowed in. Those are two instances of fraud. And they were encouraged to do that by Trump's campaign, which is conspiracy to commit a crime, I think, right? Or attempted fraud. So yeah, it's like, it's super, just the attempt itself is illegal. Even if you're not successful, the attempt is still illegal.
That's
right?
not nice. Throughout my interactions with Destiny, I've been working very hard to avoid any comments about his own personal life and situations that he's dealing with, despite the fact that when he heard I was sick, he wished death upon me, which I still don't. I still take that as being his attempt at humor. But yeah, that's kind of amusing. But yeah, Destiny takes him legal takes from Pisco. No, so then that he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's so full of crap, and he keeps goalpost shifting. Yeah, because there's a desperation here.
Possibly.
Okay.
I'll concede that it might possibly be illegal for them to do so.
Okay.
I'm not quite sure that it's illegal for Trump to do so.
It wouldn't be illegal to tell somebody to commit a crime? Isn't that illegal?
This is where it becomes complicated, right? Because
Wait,
again,
let's leave this. Let's just go anywhere else. If I tell somebody to murder
Nick is giving too much ground here. He's ceding him too much ground, and he's gonna portray this as Nick trying to like find a way to split hairs rather than the fact because he never should have ceded on the whole fraud thing at all, because there's no fraud.
somebody, have I committed a crime? If I say like, hey, tomorrow you should go to John's house and kill John.
No. That's not a crime.
It's not a crime to tell people to commit crimes?
No.
Or to help people plan crimes?
It depends. That depends on how far you go with conspiracy.
Okay, what if it goes far enough that I give you a whole plan?
Wells Fargo and Sioux Falls tomorrow and rob it, Destiny. There, I said it publicly.
Sure. Okay, what if you give me like a plan to do it? What if you say like, you're going to pick up this piece of paper from this area, you're going to go to this area, and then you're going to... Okay, so for instance, for Trump's campaign, they said that you 7 people are going to meet here. We're going to give you the false paper to sign. You're going to, get it stamped, and you're going to say that you're in the courthouse and then transmit it. They're committing fraud. They're being told to commit fraud. Some of these people attested they didn't even know they were committing fraud. They did it at the direction of Trump's campaign. What part of this isn't a crime, or how is this not a crime?
Well, if they didn't know they were committing fraud, then you've got a real problem, because fraud requires criminal intent.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think. Hold on. No. Wait. That might be true. But then,
that might be. Not might be. It's 1,000% true. Every first-year law student knows this.
Sure, but then it would just be
mens rea.
But then it would just be kicked up the chain, right? The mens rea would transfer to the person that encouraged them to commit the criminal act.
Okay, now here's the question: Can Trump actually be party to fraud in this case? Is a real question, because here's the issue. So we're hung up on this idea. I'll say you're hung up on this idea. It doesn't particularly matter to me that there are these statements in their electoral, on their elector form that says they met at the Capitol and that they're empowered by the state. They're not empowered by the state, but they're presuming that they will be empowered by the state. And you've got this.
Wait, just to be clear, you're saying they're presuming, but they attested that they were currently empowered. That's important. Because if they had said in the future we believe we will be, then I don't think you've got the fraudulent element here. But go ahead.
I think it depends on the state. I think in some states they did say that, in others they didn't. So let's give him the benefit of the doubt and try to work with the states where they did make such an attestation, assuming that there were some. I believe there may have been.
The complicating factor in all of this, and the complicating factor is that you have a time-limited constitutional process by which electors need to be submitted to the vice president, right?
Okay.
We can agree on that in December, I think it's 19th, the slate of electors must be delivered.
Sure.
And these false slates of electors, in all cases, were delivered by December 19th, following that constitutional process to that measure, correct?
Not all of them. I think Michigan and one other state, they tried to hand deliver it to Pence because they didn't get the mail in time or something, and Pence said no. But more or less, yeah, they tried to deliver them in time, sure.
Right. So there's this critical element here in which this gets really deep into the question.
I'm going to pull up the false slave electors from Michigan. Okay, you just mentioned Michigan. On December 14, 2020, certified electors in all 50 states convened to carry out their official duties related to the 2020 presidential election or award their state's electoral votes in accordance with their state's election laws. The election in Michigan was procedurally the same as in every previous modern presidential election. Nearly 5.5 million Michigan voters cast their ballots. A successful canvass in all 83 counties and multiple audits performed by the Secretary of State determined that the Democratic nominee, Joseph R. Biden, received over 2.8 million votes, approximately 154,000 more votes than the Republican incumbent, Donald Trump. The results were then certified by the bipartisan Michigan Board of State Canvassers, and the sitting governor officially recognized Michigan's state 16 electors who, in accordance with the Michigan election laws, convened on December 14th in the state Senate on 2 o'clock p.m. Despite this, the groundwork was laid to plan and send alternate slated electors to Congress in an attempt to outmaneuver and circumvent. I have to sign. Oh, this is not the actual fraudulent document. Let me pull up the. This is. I want to see. Did they attach the purported document? I want to see if I can find a document. I don't even know what this is. I apologize. I just pulled that up quickly. I'm going to keep playing this while I look for it.
Questions of what kind of law interacts with what kind of authority that exists and what kind of processes need to be followed. The same reason that the Democrats impeached Trump before he left office on January 20th, right? They weren't sure if they could impeach a non-sitting president for acts commit as president because he's not there, so it's maybe mooted. So they made sure to actually file the impeachment papers even though the trial would happen afterwards. In the same way, there's this question of whether or not a alternate slate of electors could be presented after December 19th because it would be outside the constitutional process. So there's a scramble to get these alternate slates in there. The question then becomes, if a president, if anybody credibly believes that there is a fraud committed in the election process.
All right, I found it. This is from Michigan. To the President of the Senate, United States Senate, from Kathy Burden, Chairperson, Electoral College in Michigan, December 14, 2020. Regarding Michigan electoral votes for President, Vice President, pursuant to 3 U.S.C. 11, enclosed, please find duplicate originals of Michigan's electoral votes for President, Vice President as follows: 2 duplicate originals of the President, Senate, etc. We, the undersigned, being the duly elected and qualified electors for the President and Vice President of the United States of America from the state of Michigan, do hereby certify the following: that we convened and organized in the state capitol in the city of Lansing, Michigan, at 2 p.m. Eastern Time on the 14th day of December 2020, performed the duties enjoined upon us. That being so assembled and duly organized, we proceeded to vote by ballots, and balloted first for the President and for Vice President, distinct ballots, and then following the 2 distinct lists, one of the votes for President and the other for the votes for Vice President, so cast as aforesaid, 16 for Trump and witness whereof we undecided hereunto the city of Lansing and state of Michigan on this 14th day of December 2020 subscribed our respective names. So that is, and they talk about how someone backed out. Okay. That's another person backed out. So there is a misrepresentation that's being made here that we convened and organized in the state capitol in the city of Lansing at 2 p.m. I don't know that they say that they I don't know if they say that they were so ordered pursuant to Michigan law. So it's basically that they were in the building. All right.
But they're still trying to act within the bounds of the constitutional process that exists for selecting the next president. Does a statement on a paper created by a state law process for picking electors that may not even be binding on the state actually matter in any real sense?
No.
Rather than the constitutional process that it's being followed.
No shot. None of this is true. If you believe that the fraud happens, there are appropriate channels to pursue that.
What's the appropriate channel?
One was the courts.
No court would even accept a single case. They all denied them on standing and laches grounds.
They did not deny them on standing. About 30 of them were denied on evidentiary grounds because they didn't present
No.
any evidence.
Not true. It's not true.
Yeah, that is true. We can go through case and case. There's conservative documents talking about every single case. Half of these, the majority of the ones that were rejected were done on evidentiary grounds. They try to say that it was all on standing.
Okay, so they said that there was not a claim presented upon which relief could be granted, which is a pretrial dismissal. No evidentiary. No evidence was actually weighed. There was no meritorious decision on a single election case.
Okay, that's fine, but no meritorious decision doesn't matter if you're.
I think Nick is mistaken about that. I think that in federal, I think that there was a federal court in Pennsylvania which actually issued a lengthy decision denying and rejecting it. So I think he's mistaken about that. But I think that was the only decision that was purported purported to be based on merit.
You're bringing a claim to a judge with no evidentiary basis and with insane cries for relief. When the only remedy that you're looking for is the flipping of the entire state electoral vote count, and when you're not bringing any evidence to any of these judges for it, of course they're going to reject these. But I'm sure that's standard practice for any case across the country. Yeah.
Things.
What am I conflating?
You're conflating bad cases brought by people like Sidney Powell, acting
and
alone,
Giuliani.
by the way. I don't think Giuliani didn't bring bad cases. He made very bad arguments. He wasn't the one filing a lot of cases. He was brought into cases that were already filed. But there were meritorious cases that were brought that were dismissed on standing and laches grounds. One of them involving the Supreme Court saying that no one listed, the Texas versus Georgia case, saying that no one listed had standing to bring this case, even though Trump was an impleading party.
I think he means Texas versus Pennsylvania.
To that. So they literally suggested that the sitting president and the leading contesting candidate had no standing to bring a lawsuit against a state for an alleged fraud in the election.
I don't think he was one of the primary plaintiffs for that case.
Doesn't matter. He was a plaintiff on that case. He was pled into that case.
If he was pled into it, why didn't he file the case? Why would Texas have standing to tell Georgia how to run an election? Why would any state be able to tell any other state? I thought we lived in a federalist or states' right.
I think Nick is misremembering. The primary issue that was brought up in Texas versus Pennsylvania was the idea that the Pennsylvania electors were selected by Pennsylvania without complying with Pennsylvania's own voting legislation, their own regulations. And I just want to clarify this because there seems to be a lot of confusion. I'm not sure why there is a lot of confusion about this, but Ken Braxton filed a lawsuit on behalf of the state of Texas and the electors that are being presented by the state of Texas and saying our electors are going to be diluted. We are sending forward a slate of electors from the state of Texas who are going to be voting for Trump, and their votes are going to be diluted improperly by people who are not duly elected electors from other representative states like the state of Pennsylvania. I think he may have named Georgia and other states as well. He likely named Michigan and Georgia. But the point to it was this, that ultimately there's going to be a final election, which is going to happen on January 6th. And the electors from some of these states have been chosen by those states illegally, in that they were not chosen in accordance with the voting laws of those particular states. So if the state of Pennsylvania has certain set of voting laws and they do not follow their own voting laws, the electors that they are sending are not duly elected electors. They don't have a right to vote, and their vote will be diluting our vote. And under the Supreme Court decision of Bush v. Gore, wherein the Supreme Court said that if someone in Tallahassee who has no right to vote casts a ballot, that dilutes the vote of someone in Miami, because you're basically countering and it's offsetting that vote of someone in Miami. So that person in Miami has standing to raise an issue with someone illegally voting in Tallahassee. Similarly, we here in Texas, our electors in Texas, are going to be diluted by these illegal electors in Pennsylvania. And the reason they're illegal, not because they didn't follow laws we wrote, it's because they didn't follow their own laws. And they have an obligation and a duty under the law to follow their own laws, irrespective of some new regulations that are come up with by some EO of the president, of the governor of that state, or some judge comes up with some new regulation, which are in opposite to the voting laws of that particular state. So since these are illegal electors, we cannot have them offsetting our ballots. That's what Texas versus Pennsylvania was all about. And it was a very logical argument that Ken Braxton put forward. Unfortunately, and surprisingly, not simply surprisingly, disappointingly, the Supreme Court shirked their duty to at least hear that case. They could have come forward and said, look, we hear your arguments and we disagree with you, Texas, and given forward reasons. But under the Constitution, when one state sues another, there's a duty by the Supreme Court to hear the case. They cannot just reject the case, which is what they did. They denied cert. So that's what Texas versus Pennsylvania was about. I don't know, perhaps Nick, it's been 3 years. Perhaps Nick hasn't looked at it in a while and forgot about it, but I did one of the video that Nick discovered me in is where I was chastising the Supreme Court for rejecting it.
Right's place, right? Why would we want any other state to declare another state how they should run their election process?
Why don't you tell me what lawsuit should be brought if a state believes that another state has disenfranchised their electoral votes through their fraud?
What is the injury of the state? You have to prove injury for have standing. Well, how is
the injury is that my guys are diluted?
Is injured by how Georgia runs their elections?
Okay, so if Georgia...
Wait.
I agree with you on this also, by the way. There's no fraud. If they didn't fraudulently put a signature of the governor and secretary of state, they didn't fraudulently put a stamp on it. They simply sent it there. It's ridiculous to claim fraud. Wesley says, what if an alien comes down and thinks Trump is the president because they have been in control of us forever? That makes Trump president. So they voted, but does not say they're due electors, does not have false signature of the governor or secretary of state. Yep. There was a misrepresentation there that they were in the building, which I don't know how that does anything.
Wait. Hold on. Wait. I need you to answer that question. Tell me, how is Texas injured? How do you prove standing that the thing affects you if you're looking at the state of Georgia?
Because the voters of Texas have selected a person, and the state of Georgia's fraud results in that person not being elected. Instead, someone else is. Then their electoral votes are diluted. Their right to their electoral votes.
It's Bush v. Gore. That's what Bush v. Gore said, and that's what Ken Braxton properly brought up Bush v. Gore in support of his petition for cert.
Actually been stripped of them by the fraud of another state.
No, it hasn't been. The right of their votes is that absolutely not. You're completely wrong. The people in Texas were able to vote. Their electoral votes are submitted to Congress, and their votes were counted. They don't have a right to determine how any other state does their vote. If Georgia wanted to, my understanding, if Georgia wanted to, Georgia could pass a law saying we're always going to vote for.
They could pass a law, but that's the point. They have to follow their own law.
The Democrats, and they would do that. I don't know if another state would have standing to say, well, that's not fair. Our votes aren't being counted because your state is voting in a way we don't like.
See, now you're getting back to that plenary authority argument.
Sure.
Where the states can pick whatever electors they want.
But they didn't in this case, even though the people attested to it.
It doesn't matter if they did. If
well, it does.
Pick whatever electors they want. How can you have a false slate of electors? That's a fraud.
Because they weren't picked. It would be like me holding someone up at gunpoint saying, I think I'm going to be deputized tomorrow, so I'm going to arrest you now. You can't do that.
Who was harmed?
Who was harmed where? In Georgia?
By the electors that weren't picked. Where's the harm?
The attempted harm would have.
You can't go into the whole harm. The point is the knowledge that they had at the time that it happened, the knowledge that Pence and the Congress and that everyone had, the entire country had at the time these electors went into it, did what they did.
Been the entire
population attempted harm.
Because the entire population that voted in that state would have been harmed because their votes would have been basically discounted.
Wait, whoa, no. If they have plenary authority to decide how they do elections, which is what you just said, Georgia could say, we're going to vote for Democrats every time and no one could question it.
Did Georgia do that?
I disagree. The opinions of girls matter. And I mean that sincerely. I have to convince a woman named Lily that the opinion of girls matter.
I don't know. You were the one who presented that hypothetical.
Just say, I should have just responded with beast.
No, the problem is that they claimed that the state legislature said that they could be the electors, and they weren't. You're telling me you keep saying it's possible. Yeah, it's possible, but they didn't.
Okay, so who was harmed?
Well, the attempted harm would be the voters.
Why would it be harm?
Because they voted one way, and now their entire state's vote is going to be flipped because of fraud, because people that are trying to commit fraud against the state.
But the state legislature
could? No, but they didn't. You keep saying can, but they didn't.
Where's the fucking harm, Destiny?
The harm didn't happen because the scheme didn't work.
The harm didn't happen, and if the scheme worked, what would the harm be? Because the state would have had to actually select that slate of electors, and the state has the authority to do so. Voters be damned. So where's the harm?
But the state didn't.
If the state did, there still isn't harm. That's the thing you're missing.
If the state did accept them, eventually the initial signatures were still fraudulent. What they were attesting to was still fraudulent. But
where's the harm? Because if the state accepts those...
Yeah, the harm is...
I don't like the whole but where's the harm argument that Nick is presenting here. I don't like it. I just like it. It's much easier to just say there's no fraud because everyone has knowledge.
Flipping of the vote. That's the harm.
It's not a flip of the vote.
What? It is a flip of a vote. Yeah.
No, because, okay, let's say the state never chose the set of electors it chose.
Sure.
And instead just chose this set of electors with the exact same data.
Mm-hmm.
Is there harm?
As long as the state is following the process by which they're supposed to do.
No, he's not stuck on a semantic. He's not stuck on a semantic. He's basically saying that there's one or two things that could happen. Either they will ignore them, in which case there's no harm, in which case that's not real. There's no damages, there's no fraud. Or they would be accepted, which would mean that after the fact they were correct, in which case there's nothing wrong. So either way, he's basically saying that there's no actuality to this fraud. There's no manifestation of this fraud as far as actually damaging anyone.
That's how the state runs their election.
What process is the state supposed to do?
I don't know the line-by-line process in Georgia, but my understanding is that once the vote is counted, they have
plenary authority. They can just select whoever they want. They literally can just select anybody.
They have to follow what laws were passed by their legislature. That's the point. And that they didn't. Their whole election process leading into it did not comport with their own election laws. That's part of what Texas was screaming about. When you decided without passing a law that you're going to start having vote by mail statewide, you're not compliant with your own law. When you decide that we're going to start accepting ballots on 4 days after the election, you're not complying with your own law. Even if a judge signs off on it, you have to follow what your law says. A judge can't just rewrite what's explicitly written in your own statute because, well, it's a real emergency now because of COVID.
I don't know if that's the case in every state, but they could.
It is the case in every state. That's the constitutional process. The state will choose the manner in which it selects its electors.
Okay, the state could choose the manner in which it selects its electors. Okay, sure.
Well, here's the thing, though, is Destiny believes that he's following logic, but he just doesn't. It's not being. I think Nick really should have hit on this whole thing about how there's zero fraud here, not because of the outcome, but because of the fact that because of the knowledge of all the parties. Well, in theory, to answer your question, Allegan, if there is a element of fraud, in theory, if people didn't know anything about it and that they misrepresented intentionally that they were in the state courtroom and they all signed off, that they were in the Capitol in Lansing. So that could be fraudulent if, in fact, it wasn't well known that they were locked out of the Capitol.
That doesn't get you any closer to your argument, though, because they didn't choose these people, and these people said they were chosen. That's fraud.
No, it's not.
Not fraud.
How is it not fraud?
Because they can be chosen. If they are chosen, there's no harm. If they're not chosen, there's no harm. There is no harm.
If they are chosen at the White House, there is harm. That was the attempt. The attempt was to get Pence to choose these, not the states to choose them. I agree with you. Actually, the states wanted to choose another set of electors. Well, you're wrong, but
the attempt was not to get Pence to choose the new state of electors. The attempt was to get an objection to the slate of electors that was presented, have that go back to the state, and have an alternate slate of electors prepared to be accepted by the state and certified immediately.
That was one of multiple plans, but the one that they went with at the end, was that Pence would see two different slates of electors. He would table those. Then a debate would happen over which one was real. And then he would table that conversation. He would say, well, you guys can't figure out what's going on. Then he would throw it back to the House, and then House representatives, of which there would have been 26 Republicans and 24 Democrats, would have voted, and they ideally would have made Trump the president. That was the final plan that they went with on the day of.
Constitutional process by which that could occur, right?
A constitutional process built on the fraudulent submission of the false electors. Also, and even whether or not Pence could even do that is probably not true. But this is all built on the fraudulent process of the fake elector slates.
So you just laid out a constitutional process by which this can occur based on an objection and a competing slate of electors that the state could adopt.
You're moving past the fraud, though, right? Like I could have sex with somebody if they consented, but I could just have sex with them, and then maybe later on we could see if they consent. Like, you're moving past the crime, the fraudulent part. If they had indeed, let's say Georgia had said, you know what, we're going to send two. What?
Nothing. That's a shit analogy, but go on.
It's not. Well, no, your analogy is ridiculous. They committed fraud. They attested to something that wasn't true. That's fraud. The people told them to do that. That's fraud. It was a fraudulent scheme to have a slate of electors accepted, saying that the state empowered us to do it. And you can say, well, the state could. The state didn't. You could do a million things, but they didn't, and they still have it. So it was fraud. You must admit, at least now, that since they didn't, now it's definitely fraud, right? Is it like a quantum state of fraud where if your fraudulent scheme works, it's not fraud, and if it does work, it's no longer fraud? Or
if I tell you that I am actually Donald Trump, and because I'm actually Donald Trump, you need to donate money to Good Lawgic, and you need to send a $100 super chat to Good Lawgic. The reason you need to send a $100 super chat to Good Lawgic is because I am Donald Trump, and I'm going to use that to fight against these nefarious prosecutions. Did I just commit fraud? If I swear on a stack of Bibles and sign in front of a notary here, which apparently is some sort of, I don't know, apparently a notary is some magical creature in Destiny land. I sign under oath in front of a notary that I am Donald Trump, and therefore you must send me a $100 super chat so that you can help save democracy because of all these wrongful persecutions that are being fomented as prosecutions by Jack Smith, Fannie Willis, and Alvin Bragg, and that if you want to save democracy, you need to send a $100 super chat to Good Lawgic right now. Did I commit fraud or attempted fraud? If I said it with all seriousness, would that be committing fraud? Think for a second. Just think for a second. Is that fraud? And the obvious answer is no, because y'all know I ain't Donald Trump. But you just swore to it. You just said that you were. You swore to it. There was a notary and everything. No, it's not fraud. It's not fraud. Because you have knowledge of it. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. That's not $100. Hey, Mr. Trump, you look weird with glasses. Enough fraud was shown. Congress could have chosen the president. Congress ratifies the election. It's constitutional for Congress to choose a president. I don't know what fraud was shown to Congress, but here you go, Nacho. I owe you $90.
The problem you're at is you are operating backwards and presuming a criminal act, and then retroactively going through the facts and determining that this leads to the conclusion that there is a criminal act that I have determined occurred. But if you start from zero, presumption of innocence, and you go, do we get to harm for a fraud to occur?
That's why I don't like where he's going to the whole harm, because then you got to establish that fraud without harm is not fraud, which I'm not even sure if that's 1,000% true. It's probably without any harm. If you commit fraud and there's zero harm, is that fraud or not? You do need damages. It's an element of, at least in civil fraud. I don't know in criminal fraud.
No. Do we get to the possibility of harm for fraud to occur? No. because there is no way to fraudulently induce that slate of electors into legitimacy. There isn't a possible way to do it, because it requires everybody who would have to authorize that slate of electors to say yes through a power that they have for it to occur.
Okay.
This was
Let me
yesterday.
just understand what you're telling me. So
Last
you're
night.
telling me that attempted fraud can only occur if it has like a clear shot of working. Is that what you're attesting to right now?
Well, he's getting there. Just say if all parties have knowledge. Yes. See, yes. It's close enough. It's close enough.
Attempted fraud can only work. Fraud. You can only ever be charged with attempted fraud if there's like a clear shot of it working.
No, you're still working backwards from a fraud.
Wait, hold on.
Okay.
Hold on. I'm working right at the start. You're the one that's working backwards, because the start, you are, because you're saying, well, they could in the future. That's literally the definition of working backwards. At the moment that they signed those papers, they said, we are the duly elected slate of electors from Georgia. You agree that at the time they signed that, it was false, correct?
From a civil perspective, yeah, you need damages. From a criminal perspective, it probably would be like a misdemeanor. Because normally when they talk about how much you're stealing, the amount that you're stealing or the amount of damage that you're causing would impact the level of felony. So arguably it would not be criminal.
Correct? When they said we are the duly elected slate of electors, yes, that was false, right?
Well, false is such a funny word, isn't it?
Oh my
No,
God.
it's probably an important word if you're making a legal analysis of something, whether something is true or false.
When you say that, Nick, that makes it sound like you're cogitating or you're trying to dance out through semantics instead of actually just finishing him on this argument.
So I would imagine, right?
You're hanging up on whether or not that language matters at all.
So you think that any 7 citizens in any state they want can say we are the duly elected slate of electors, and there could be 1,000 different transmissions of electoral votes to Congress?
Whoa, what was that? Viola Pride. God bless you. I'm going to give you another one. $100 Rumble Rant saying, Joe Trump 2024, horn for the diggers. God bless you, Viola. A riffraff says, here's another $2. Tell cult follower number 6 Joseph he only owes another 96. All right. Well, I guess I just committed fraud. Whew. It's working.
Congress every single year from every state, and none of those people would be committing fraud. They say, well, we're the duly elected slate of electors.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because how do they become duly elected slate of electors?
Because the state legislature, the electoral body, says they nominate them, they appoint them.
And then they stamp.
Nailed it.
Yes.
Right.
They didn't do that here, though, right?
You have to certify it, right?
No, you're wrong. No, you're going ahead again. It's not about the certification of the vote. We're not even at that point.
I'm not talking about the vote. They have to certify the slate of electors.
Correct. Okay, correct. The state body does.
Yes.
Okay. The state body did not certify these people,
and
but they said
therefore
they were certified then.
No, they didn't say they were certified, and they didn't present any certification, and everyone knew it was false. So everyone knew they were not duly certified by the state. Oh my God, this is so aggravating.
They said we were duly elected. That's fraud. That's not true. That was a lie. They signed that. That's a lie.
But the lie doesn't matter because there's no way for harm to occur unless the state actually adopts, well, which wouldn't be harm. The state would have to actually adopt them as electors.
Okay.
And then they would have to be accepted by Mike Pence for their scheme to work. They
Gotcha.
would have to have those two things happen.
I understand. That's fine. So then I just want you to tell me.
I fraudulently induce them to do that.
Okay. Then I just want you to tell me. I want you to say that there's no crime of fraud or attempted fraud if the plot that you scheme is unlikely or impossible to work.
No, if they can't be fooled, it's not fraud, because fraud implies that you are misleading someone and they cannot be fooled. And they'd even take steps to try fooling it. If they were taking steps to try fooling it, they would have stamped it. They would have forged her signature. It was forged Whitmer's signature, forged Dana Nessel's signature. Then you could say, okay, you know what? They're trying to trick people. But they didn't even do that.
You can't charge somebody with fraud for that. That's what you're saying.
You charge someone with a lot of stuff. I don't know that you secure a conviction.
So, okay, let me be more precise.
fraud or attempted fraud, there is no crime if the scheme that you concoct can't possibly work.
No, if the scheme you concoct doesn't include deception, and there's no deception. Say it, Nick, please, and then move on to the next topic.
You have to, okay, so crime gets really complicated because you have to have a criminal intent.
Nicholas,
there was a criminal intent. The intent was to flip the vote of the state and to, well, no, hold on, I'm sorry, even past that.
It's not the intent.
That was the intent. Why do you think they did an opposite slate of electors? That was the intent, was to flip the vote of the state. Yes.
No, the intent is to be adopted under the process by which adoption can occur. Right? They wanted the constitutional process to be followed, but with them as the chosen slate, as the alternative.
None of this has to do with they wanted the
They're contesting was that the original slate was actually based on fraud, right? Fraudulent.
It doesn't matter. That's not the forum to address that.
What is the forum? I asked you this earlier.
I answered you. I said the forum was the courts, and the secondary forum can be Donald Trump himself asking his DOJ and intelligence agencies to go and investigate. Those are the two appropriate forums.
Oh, wait. Donald Trump asking the DOJ to investigate is an appropriate forum?
To look for voter fraud? Yes.
That's one of the criminal charges against Donald Trump. You realize that, right?
No,
Jack
it's not.
Smith is.
Nope.
Oh, wait a minute. Actually, it literally is.
It literally is not. No, it is not.
Jack Smith has indicted Donald Trump for investigative efforts into the election.
No, he calls
them. Okay. Wow.
Which we can go through the indictment. Which charge do you think is charging Donald Trump for investigative efforts? There's only four charges on the Jack Smith indictment. So we can go over the charges if you want.
Go for it. Read them.
So I'll read the things and then we can scroll down and see what there were for. So 1 is conspiracy to defraud the United States. 2 is conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding. 3 is obstruction of and attempting to obstruct an official proceeding. And then 4 is conspiracy against rights. I think at the bottom,
indicted on more than 4 counts.
There's the Mar-a-Lago case, and then there's a Georgia RICO case.
Indictment?
Yeah,
it is the Georgia.
The Georgia one might have more.
Georgia RICO case.
That is what he's thinking of.
That's the one where he calls Raffensperger.
Yeah,
correct.
Right?
But remember, for a RICO case, all of the individual elements don't have to be crimes themselves. That's why it's a RICO case. So he might get charged in the RICO case. One of the underlying things might be investigating the election. But their argument for the RICO case is because this member of an enterprise was doing this in the furtherance of the crime that they were attempting to commit, right? Which is different than the Jack Smith
RICO
indictment.
cases are hilarious, and if this is RICO, that'll be really funny. I doubt it. The funny part would be Rudy Giuliani's involvement.
Of course,
make it a grand irony.
Yeah,
but okay, so I'm thinking of the Georgia case where part of the allegation is what Trump would categorize as his investigation into this. I haven't read through the indictment in a while as far as what the actual conspiracy entails, but I believe part of it was what Trump again would consider his investigative power as the chief executive. I think it's the conspiracy to defraud the United States one, because they're talking about, if I'm not mistaken, his inclusion or the inclusion of the January 6th speech is in there, right? As part of the conspiracy to defraud the United States.
On the Jack Smith one, I don't remember if the speech is here, but I don't remember the investigative power. Are you thinking of when? Are you thinking of? Are you thinking
it was the investigative power? Trump would state that he was following this process, his duty to talk about election fraud, right? Like that's
he's not being charged with his speeches as well, though, right?
I think that's in part of the conspiracy to defraud the United States because his speeches both on January 6th and his speeches subsequent to it on television, his constant assertion that it's a fraud. Is definitely included in the indictment.
I don't believe so. The indictment for the Jack Smith one wasn't talking about those speeches that he made to the public. He was talking about those same claims that he was repeating privately to pressure state election officials to flip elections. And a lot of the statements were the same, but
privately to pressure state election officials to flip the election. Now, what was he basing the pressure on?
Jack Smith or Donald Trump?
Trump. How's he pressuring them?
He was basically saying that there's massive evidence of voter fraud. There's probably criminal activity here, that you guys need to look into this more and, blah, 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 essentially.
Okay, so Donald Trump is saying that we believe there's massive evidence of voter fraud. We're asking you to look into it more because bad things have happened. We have data that conflicts with your data, says that we win, right? So how is that not him pursuing his investigative power as the chief law enforcement officer of the country?
Because the onus on Jack Smith is going to be, and he believes he can do this, and if you're reasonable, it's obviously true. Trump is knowingly lying when he's making those assertions. Trump is pressuring them to change their vote off of.
That is such a ridiculous read. And the reason it's such a ridiculous read is because one thing that's pretty clear about Trump is that he believes his own farts don't stink. Now, you could say that he was being ridiculous. If you're sitting on the left, you could say he was ridiculous. But it's like, they, on the one hand, they say that he's this crazy megalomaniac, egomaniac who, you know, who thinks he's, you know, something, you know, beyond human. On the other hand, they say he knows the truth. Which is it? Like, pick a side.
Things that he knows are not true.
So you think that Trump's entire thing about the election fraud, Trump is knowingly lying? He says he,
yes,
absolutely. He definitely didn't win, but he's like, I know I didn't win, but we're going to go out there. We're going to beautiful statements about voter fraud, complete falsity.
Yep.
We knew we didn't win.
100%.
We're going to say we did.
Yeah.
So that.
Okay. Absolutely, of course. Easily. Yeah.
But Trump's defense is, of course, I'm not lying. I was using my investigative power, right?
But the problem is, he absolutely would never say that, because every time that Trump used his investigative power, all of the investigations came back saying, no, there was no voter fraud. Barr said, no, there was no voter fraud. The FBI said, no, there was no voter fraud. The DHS said, no, there's no voter fraud. His counsel, his personal attorneys, his White House attorneys, every single person around him said there's no voter fraud. So
no,
you wouldn't talk about his investigative powers.
No, every person you heard from for the state has said that, or your January 6th committee hearings, but you don't know who else he spoke to who was confirming that there was fraud. So no, you don't know that. This is where you're basically believing your own hype. That now at this point he's like, this is what everyone was telling him. He's the only one who's saying it. That's certainly not true. There were folks like John Eastman or Cheesebro and Giuliani who were certainly telling them that there was fraud. But he knew that they were the wrong ones, and the Bill Barrs of the world were the right ones. Like, it's so stupid. I'll tell you right now. I went through those charts. I went through that brief the other night by Edwin Meese and Lawson, and it's a powerful attack on Jack Smith's power to claim that he's acting on behalf of the United States. It is a really strong attack, which we're probably going to hear about on January 9th. On January 9th, I will be live streaming at 9:30 a.m. oral arguments from the DC in front of the DC Circuit Court. And the DC Circuit Court has said that they intend to hear from the litigants as well as those who are filing amici brief. So, and one of those amici briefs was filed by former Attorney General Edwin Meese, who says that anything that Jack Smith has done, any indictments he's filed, must be dismissed because there's no position under the law of special prosecutor, and if there was such a position, he was not properly chosen for it. That it would be considered a superior officer, which has to be recommended by the president and then confirmed by Congress and by the Senate, and that never happened, and that he would be ineligible for it. In fact, he's never been nominated by the president for anything ever. So it's not like he's some superior officer under which is a term that's recognized in the Constitution, that has been confirmed for some position, now is transferring over to this made up position of special prosecutor. It's a really, really biting attack on his authority, and I think it's gonna. And I'm looking forward to hearing Edwin Meese being questioned about this as part of the oral arguments on October 9th. I'm hopeful that they will give an opportunity to weigh in, because I think it's a really interesting argument.
Sanity or some other weird thing, but no. Every single person he entrusted to research voter fraud came back and said there was no voter fraud.
I don't actually think that's true, but that's fine.
Well, that's what everybody has testified to, like under oath.
No one's testified actually yet at all in this case.
Not in this case, but they've testified to those sets of facts under oath in front of Congress.
At the J6, what about the people that Congress didn't present in the J6?
For the January 6th Select Committee.
But that's not everybody. That's the people who Congress has asked
It was all the people that I just named.
I will be awake.
Yeah,
January 9th.
The January 6th select committee is a great one. We won't even get into that.
Sure, we don't have to. You can think it's about. You can think what you want about it, but these are statements that are made under oath.
But that's not made by everybody. Just you only heard from the ones that they decide to present. That's the whole issue.
Penalty of perjury. So you might not like them, or you might think it's biased, but the people that were in that committee and testified under oath, and these are statements that are probably heavily being drawn on for the Georgia RICO case and for the Jack Smith indictment. So I mean,
they're also heavily drawn on the Colorado case, and the dissenting judges laughed at the hearsay aspect of that testimony being utilized against Donald Trump. In fact, with one of the Colorado judges saying that I've been a judge for 33 years, and what I saw happen was nothing even close to law or anything I've ever seen in my life.
Wait, is it hearsay if you have somebody testifying to what a defendant said? Is that hearsay?
Trump wasn't a defendant in that case.
Then what is the... Wait, in what case? Wait, which case are we talking?
The Colorado case where he was kept off the ballot. Right, like the January 6th select committee report was
that's kind of harsh.
Contested. It was objected to as hearsay, but Trump wasn't a defendant in that case. So,
who would be considered the, I guess, plaintiff or defendant for the Colorado one?
The plaintiff were the voters, and the respondent in that case was the Secretary of State.
Gotcha.
Colorado.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yes, you can use an opposing party's statement against interest against them. Specifically, a statement against interest can be admitted over a hearsay objection. We're getting into the weeds here,
but you're really getting into
again,
the weeds.
So you have a select committee report with a biased selection of people, and you say everybody has testified that anytime Trump uses investigatory power, they all told him no. Well, no, the people that were asked by the January 6th select committee might have told him no. They might have said, oh, or they might have reported that they...
I'm watching this because I enjoy a good legal debate. So that's why I'm watching this. Did he take pre-law? Guests took pre-law just to be argumentative? Okay. Did you see how Musk SpaceX is going after NLRB administrative law judges as unconstitutional? It could be a blow against deep and agency overreach. I have not seen this. I need to look at that to really know.
They told him no? Sure. I'm not saying that they're lying either. I'm just saying that there's probably plenty of other people Trump consulted.
I'm so curious. Wait, hold on. I'm so curious.
There's no duty to believe them.
Do you believe that when Trump goes to defend himself in court, do you think there are going to be credible people that attest that they told Trump there was election fraud? You really think that's going to happen? I'm curious.
I don't think we're ever going to.
I have no idea.
Okay. Almost certainly.
I would think if you're going to take it to trial, you'd have to.
But I also think that Trump
likely should have criminal immunity from this.
Okay, that's a whole other thing. I personally don't believe the president should be above the law.
He's not. He'd be within the law. Well,
you're saying that he should be immune from all forms of fraudulent statements or all forms of conspiracy or...
No, there's impeachment.
We're talking about a criminal trial, though.
Yeah, I am too.
Do you think Trump would fare better in an impeachment proceeding? Why would an impeachment proceeding be more? Well, he wasn't convicted. He wasn't convicted in crimes for the impeachments, right?
Right.
He can't be convicted by crimes for an impeachment trial. He'd be subject to removal. The impeachment clause has a possible reading. Hopefully, the Supreme Court will answer this. That suggests that a president can only be criminally charged following a successful impeachment.
So if the president murdered somebody, if they didn't impeach him in Congress, he's immune from state or federal prosecution for the murder?
It's an interesting question that I'm not quite sure the answer of because it's never been asked.
Well, I guess we're going to find out with these Trump cases then.
Well, the way it's been addressed, the way it's being addressed before the D.C. Circuit Court, which this is the topic which is coming up before the D.C. Circuit Court, as to his immunity, which that's what we're going to be listening to on January 9th at 9:30 a.m. right here on Good Lawgic, is this issue as to his immunity, but it's not being couched exactly in this sort of the setting that these two gentlemen are discussing it. It's more as far as whether if acts that he takes that are part of his duties as president could require impeachment prior to and conviction in the Senate prior to there being any criminal proceedings.
Maybe. So there's a couple possible outcomes that are really interesting, and that this is where all of this kind of comes to a giant issue for Jackson.
Fair enough. That's a fair critique.
Smith and everybody else, right? There's three possible outcomes. President has no presidential immunity for criminal acts. The president currently, every president currently enjoys civil immunity for any official acts as president, even up to the outer perimeter of feasible presidential acts, right? Anything that could possibly be a
This is inaccurate, but we'll come back to the rest of what you're saying here.
Presidential act is presumed a presidential act, and they're immediately immune from civil suit. Any acts that are specifically not presidential acts, but entirely personal acts, they are still subject to civil suit for, right?
Like a re-election campaign?
That is not actually entirely personal. Shockingly enough, I know they're trying to make it out to be so, but throughout all of history, presidents have intermingled re-election campaigns with official acts. Hell, right now, if Joe Biden goes out and gives a speech about the border, right? And his border policy, is that an official act as president, or is that a re-election act?
Probably commingled or something.
Exactly. So how?
Sorry about that. Almost all of them are commingled. Very few things that a president does are not commingled for his own personal benefit as well for re-election. Certainly when he's on first term, for both re-election and for furtherance of his duties. I mean, think about it. Whether any bill he's trying to pass, he's going to use that to try and say, this is why you should re-elect me. So almost all of them are commingled. And in general, when we see they're commingled, we favor him as far as saying it's a presidential act. Now, let me address what Casey Anderson's saying here. One or two, Recaita's wrong. The entire purpose of the fake electors was create confusion, not to be actual electors. So Pence could lie and throw both of them out. At which time it would then be sent to Republican-controlled House, and Trump could be voted president. Also, pull the fake elector docs. There are overt lies in the first line fraud. Well, I brought up one of them, and the only lie that was expressed there was, or arguably a lie that they were inside the state courthouse. They didn't, in Michigan, they didn't claim that they were chosen by the governor or secretary of state. There was no signature that was purportedly from them, from either Whitmer or Dana Nessel. I can pull up the other ones as well, if you like. But I think we're going to find that none of them incorporated a seal of the state, which is a necessary thing to put on there in order for it to be that all 46 other states, all 43 other states had, that they didn't have. In fact, they had 50 slates which had them. If you include the ones that they were trying to knock out, like the ones for Biden from Michigan, the ones from Biden from Georgia, the ones from Biden from New Mexico and Pennsylvania. So there were 50 slates that all had the seal and signature of the Secretary of State and governor. So when you talk about this being a fraud, now when you talk about what the purpose was, I think the purpose ultimately morphed. But the initial purpose when they were signing off on it, for at least many of them, even expressly said that the reason that they were signing this was in case election fraud is ultimately adjudicated in favor of Trump, that they wanted to comport with requirements under state law to get it done by December 14th and not have a problem that there's a procedural deficiency, so that if in fact Trump won the state, their votes would not be tossed out, which arguably they would have been. Imagine it's December 14th. You don't know what's going to happen over the next couple of weeks. You're in the state of New Mexico. You're signing off. You know that if you don't sign off on it today and the election is in the state of New Mexico is overturned a week later, that you cannot sign it a week later. It would be invalid. And what would happen is there would be no votes coming from the state of New Mexico, rather than him getting those votes. So that was the purpose when it was initially signed. Everyone, anyway, you can go back through the records and you'll see that that's what all of them were, virtually every one of them was saying. Now, did it ultimately morph that by the time we got to January 6th, when they had not been an overturning in any of those states, that they said, hey, you know what? Now that these alternate slate of electors are here, Pence has the ability to use these alternate slate of electors to say, well, I have two purported slates of electors here, and based on that, I need Congress to weigh in as to what's going to happen here, and I'm invalidating all of these and letting the states decide it. Yes, that definitely did happen. At least it was a push for that was supported by John Eastman and Trump. And that was the advice that Trump got. And arguably, under the law, Pence had the authority to do that. And the reason I could tell you that arguably under the law, Pence had the authority to do that was because they wrote a law after January 6, 2020, saying no longer can a vice president do that. And if it was so crystal clear that Pence did not have the authority on January 6, 2021, they would not have bothered to subsequently pass a law saying that a vice president does not have that ability. So now, whether or not that law governs or not is an interesting question, given the fact that it's a law about the Constitution, and whether or not you can have a standalone bill that's going to be alternate, that's going to be affecting the interpretation of the Constitution is in itself a legal question. But there certainly is greater basis for the position that the vice president is sitting there as nothing more than a game show hostess and waving and saying, look at this beautiful car, but instead saying, look at this beautiful slate of electors. Tell us what these electors say, Johnny. Well, these electors say that if these votes go to Donald Trump. Like, that's essentially what they're purporting was the role of Pence on January 6, 2021. But if that really was his role, you have to ask yourself why Congress is bothering to try passing a statute after January 6th saying vice presidents do not have a power. And that they can only do is open up and read off what's been signed off by certified by the state. Why write that law if, in fact, he didn't have that ability? But putting all that aside, my point is you're saying that when the entire purpose of the flake collectors was to create confusion, that was not the initial purpose. I would grant you that after they signed off on it, there was an objective to try and push Pence into taking these steps. And I don't know that that's confusion. I don't think we're ever going to know that because, frankly, now that the law was passed, it's unlikely that it's ever going to be overturned, that interpretation is ever going to be overturned. So we're going to be sitting here wondering this same question probably longer than we'll be wondering who shot JFK, because it's not something that's ever going to come up again, because now there is a new law that was put into effect, which has now stripped the vice president, or at least purports to strip the vice president of any such authority. Super Chaps presuppose a desired inference, not what is present in the evidence. Yeah, well, that's.
How can you possibly disentangle those?
What was Donald Trump doing when he was going to Raffensperger claiming voter fraud with no evidence and then begging him to flip the vote? In what capacity as president?
He has no evidence, but he claimed that they had evidence. And I listened to that whole call. Did you listen to it or read it?
Yep, hour and 10 minutes, every word.
Yeah, remember
he
when
repeated
he said,
multiple claims that had been basically proven incorrect over and over and over again. That's why Raffensperger and the other guy on the call said, we've already looked into this and it's already been proven false. And Trump had actually been told that prior to this
lie,
call.
But
it wasn't a lie. All of that is true.
No, they
did not actually audit the vote. They recounted the vote, which is a completely different thing. That's what Trump, and then Trump and his attorney said, please give us the data you have because our data says something different, and they refused to hand it over.
Because they don't have the right to that data, and Trump's data didn't say anything.
Well, why wouldn't you be proud to show it to him? Why not be proud to show it to him? If you're so right, just show it to him. Just show it to him. That's what you do. If you're so sure, Raffensperger, then why would you hold it back?
Different. They don't have any. Well, then they can ask, but they don't have a right to it. And every claim, all the major claims they made were lies. Giuliani is literally just filed a settlement with that Ruby Freeman saying that, like, yeah, I kind of lied, but like that's my First Amendment right. That same video about her triple counting the ballots that I think Trump brought up 5 times on that phone call has been debunked for 3 years. Yeah, almost every single claim that he made on that call was a lie and had already been previously unproven. Now, if you want to say, well, they wanted access to the
wasn't disproven when he made the call.
It might not have been publicly disproven, but his private counsel had told him that it was disproven because the DOJ and the FBI had already looked into these things. Same thing with the Dominion voting machines. Yes, that's why on that call, Raffensperger said, we've looked into this and there is nothing here. All they do is pull the footage.
Isn't the DOJ or the FBI.
No, but Barr is the one that told him that this is all bullshit, and he looked into it. Pence was also asked to look into these types of claims, and he said there's nothing here. And Raffensperger on the phone call told him they'd looked into the Ruby Freeman thing, and that also wasn't true.
What Trump asked Raffensperger, the other guy, to do is to give them data to compare to the data that they had that suggested a different result, right?
So Trump didn't have that data.
Why are you saying that?
Trump said on the phone, we have data that says that we won.
I understand. That's a lie. That's part of what he's being charged with. That was a lie when he said that. That's why it's fraud.
So you think that Trump had no basis for that statement?
None of them. Correct. Yes. Correct. Yes. That's the whole point of these indictments. Yes.
I think that's a bold claim.
Well, that's what they'll have to prove in court. That's why you
I
got
don't
like
think they have to prove it with you. You've presumed his guilt.
Well, I haven't. Well, no, because these are.
Yes, you have. You said it was a lie.
I'm sorry. Let me be more clear. The indictments allege that it's a lie. It could be the case that all of the indictments.
You're never indicted, buddy.
It could be the case that all of these indictments are built on bullshit. It could be the case that the people that made statements to the J6 committee lied under oath. That's possible. In which case, obviously, none of this would be true. I'm running under the assumption that statements made under oath are generally true, and that the underlying material of the indictments are generally true. But if you want to run with the
Casey, you sent 2 super chats, so I'm going to tell you can refer back to what I said over an hour ago, which is that you cannot have fraud when everyone knows the facts. There are no facts here which were purporting to mislead any person. It is impossible by any legal yardstick to have fraud when everyone is aware of the facts, much as when I make a statement to you right now, I am Donald Trump. I need you to send me money to fight off the evil, crazy Jack Smith who is not acting under the law, and you need to send money, a super chat of $100 to me right now in order for you to help me fight against Jack Smith because I'm Donald Trump. Is that fraud, Casey? Is that fraud? The answer is clearly no. Even if I swear, and I say, I swear, I am Donald Trump, and I'm facing these terrible litigations. This whole thing is a sham. The whole thing is a scam, and they're trying to throw me in jail forever. I was just talking to Melania about this, and she's like, I can't believe that Jack Smith is coming after you so hard, Donald. And I was like, I know. This whole thing is just, the left is crazy, and they're just, if I say this to you, there's no fraud because you know I'm not Donald Trump. So when they are signing off on something that every human on the planet, every person in Congress knows is not something they know exactly what facts happen, there's no fraud any more than if there's fraud if I say to you right now, I'm Donald Trump, send me money. This is what this you're so desperate. The left is so desperate to come up with this term fraud without thinking through what the hell fraud is. Fraud implies that there's a misrepresentation the other party is detrimentally relying on. That is an element to fraud. Detrimental reliance. They are that the party who's suffering is detrimentally reliant on the statement. It has to be a material statement, which is false, and the other party is detrimentally relying on it. And there's scienter, meaning intent, that I'm going to trick you into doing this. You're missing 3 elements here. And then you need damages. You don't have damages, you don't have detrimental reliance, you don't have scienter. So this is like so far from fraud, it's a joke. And no matter how many times you scream, but you lied. Lying is fraud. It's not. Lying is not fraud. Lying in a document is not fraud. Okay? It's not as a legal matter. No matter how much you can wish upon a star that we call that fraud, it's not fraud. It's not a crime. Even if it's notarized, even if there's a swearing, it's not a crime. Not if everyone knows the truth. How many times I gotta say this? I pledge $100 to cult leader Joe. I'll give you a bomb for that. I pulled up the documents. It doesn't matter what they say because everyone knows the truth. The same way if I say to you, I'm Donald Trump, it doesn't do anything. I'm Donald Trump, therefore you should give me money. It doesn't do anything because you know it's not true. So too, when they're signing off on it, and there's no forged signature. There's no of the Secretary of State. There's no forged signature of the governor, and there's no seal from the state. And it's being publicly reported that this is an alternate slate of electors, which has not been endorsed by the state. There is no more detrimental reliance by Congress or by anyone than there would be from this guy here saying, I pledge $100 to cult leader Joe if he called me cult leader Trump because of what I said 3 minutes ago. The VP still has constitutional right and duty to send an unconditional election to the House. The House cannot change this without a constitutional amendment. Well, I didn't look at the actual language of the statute, but I know they tried affecting his ability to send something out. Here to Joe because Casey doesn't understand. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Fraud needs intent to deceive. Yep, that's the answer. The left and those who argue are projecting intent without evidence because that's what they do. It's not just intent. There has to be deception. Not a lie. Not a lie that everyone knows is a lie, but actual deception. Yo, Joe, new G, good logic shorts up, some better than others. Oh, yeah, you guys should check it out. I love his work. Late night in the following program. Awesome. $98 to $3 chat equals $94. Good job, good logic. $100 chat, less my fee. Good night. I appreciate that. So happy back in here for live. Me too, Mama, for we missed you.
Defense that I think actually all of this is a lie and all of this is false and all of this is not true. And every single person involved in this has been lying to the J6 committee and other congressional.
Apparently. Of his marriage, his wife's marriage vows were more fraudulent.
Hearings and to the media and every single person close around Trump, including his re-election committee, White House counsel, Vice President Pence, and his entire legal team prior to Sidney Powell. Like, if you want to say all of those people are lying, that's fine. You can run with that. I personally don't think that that's very likely, but it's possible.
You don't think that's likely?
No, absolutely
you don't think
not.
It's like,
of course not.
Wow. Okay, I'm very shocked by that. Destiny, have you ever heard of a prosecuting attorney writing a false indictment and a police officer in the same case making a false claim and having someone convicted for it? Have you ever heard of that happening?
I can't think of a particular case, but I'm sure it's happened. Yeah.
You're sure it's happened? Are you sure it's happened this week?
Based on the fact that there's 330 million people in the United States, it wouldn't surprise me if it happens on a weekly basis. Yeah.
It might even happen in marriage vows from the Swiss models, from Swedish models. Thank you, Modima Rose. Much obliged.
I wouldn't be surprised if it happens on a daily basis.
Okay.
I wouldn't be surprised if it happens multiple times per day per state.
Okay.
The question is now.
Wait. Can I ask you a quick question on that? How many times do you think cases involving over 50 sworn witnesses that have all made statements attesting to a certain fact, that they've done this privately to multiple investigative bodies and to the media, that they've all attested to this fact, and then all of these people are lying, and that the DA's taken all of these false.
What's the difference between a lie and deception? A deception. This is a lie. When I say to you, I am Donald Trump, that is a lie. It would be deception if I did something to help fool you and you didn't know that it was actually not Donald Trump. You can say something that's not true, that's not remotely deceiving. But they can legally say they're opposite sex in all sports competition, change official IDs. That's not fraud. Yeah, seriously.
False claims and then made an indictment. How often do you think that happens?
You're going farther than I am. You're saying everyone's lying. I'm not saying everyone's lying.
Okay, all of them are attesting to the same claim. So you're saying half of them are lying and half of them aren't?
The same claims because they all have different information.
Okay.
Right. Bill Barr can testify to what he told Trump. No one else can testify to what Bill Barr told Trump.
No, but they're all looking at similar sets of information. There are only 50 states in the United States. 7 of them were the ones that were the most battled over, and tons of people were looking at the exact same sets of data, the exact same videos, relying on the DOJ and the underlying intelligence agencies. Like, a lot of people are looking at similar stuff, and they all told Trump it's not true. But you think that there's a good chance.
Have intelligence agencies ever lied under oath to Congress? Have intelligence agency officials ever lied under oath to Congress?
It's possible.
It's possible.
Okay, wait. If you're smart enough, if you're smart enough,
2 months, Smopo Vienna, tell him how it is our almighty leader, Joe. I'm not the leader. I'm not the leader of the cult. I'm a follower, just like the rest of you. I'm not the leader of the cult. Is that a lie? Is that deception? I'm not the leader of the cult. It's not even a cult type of cult. Lie equals dishonest, where deception equals... No, deception means you actually have an intent to fool someone.
Enough not to trust them. Why did Donald Trump ask them to investigate if he knew they were going to lie?
If he knew they were, he didn't know they were going to lie.
Not cult.
Oh, so he asked them to investigate something, but he was only going to accept one answer? What does that sound like to you?
He's presumed the answer. He believed... You've just proven that he believed legitimately that there was voter fraud.
I didn't prove that. I proved that he wants that answer. I don't think he believes it. Because even his own campaign was telling him.
Doesn't believe it?
Yeah, of course. What do you mean he wants it? Yes, that's called fraud. Yes, he wants an answer that he knows isn't true. That's fraud. That is fraud. Yes.
You're working backwards again. You have presumed the fraud and are working back to.
You literally just said that he presumed he won. I'm asking you, why would he ask people for an answer if he was only going to accept one? He said, well, he presumed he won. That's working backwards. My working forwards would be you ask somebody to investigate.
There was voter fraud. He genuinely believes there's voter fraud.
If he believes it and you ask your investigative bodies to look into it and they come back and they say no, at what point should you change your belief?
Oh, but that doesn't...
I don't know. What point would you change your belief if you...
But that assumes he believes the people who looked into it, that they're right rather than being misinformed.
Genuinely believe it. Well, what level of evidence could be presented to you by someone in the face of your dogmatic belief to be true? What would someone have to do to change your mind?
Well, I would try not to have a dogmatic belief about a fact of the matter because that would make you delusional.
Well, we're going to have to disagree on this case here, but that's fine.
Okay, if Trump wants to plead insanity or he wants to be delusional, I mean, I guess he can do that.
Why is it insanity to disbelieve people who you don't think have done an adequate job?
If the DOJ, the FBI, every state body that's looked into this, if every independent investigation, if every single person that looked into this did an inadequate job, at what point are you delusional?
What level of power does it take to defraud the entire country on an election for the president of the United States?
What type of power does it take?
Yeah, how much power does it take? What do you have to do? How deep do you have to go?
Well, apparently pretty deep because Trump went pretty deep and it didn't work. So,
well, Trump attempted to defraud the country.
Yep.
So this is interesting because there is no. Again, we get to this problem where there's no ultimate harm or fraud. Trump didn't delay the exchange of power.
Why do you hold on? Wait, stop.
I don't know why he keeps coming back to this. I don't know why he does this. Nicholas, forget about the damage. Focus on the lack of deception.
Hold on. I don't know why you keep saying this, okay? I just want you to tell me this. And if this is fine, we can skip this whole part of the conversation, okay? You keep making this argument.
It's not just this, Economath. It's not just this. The point being, they interviewed 2,000 people. I mean, there were thousands of people that they spoke to, and they presented, I don't know, 50, 75. What did the other 500 tell him? Why is it that we assume that he believed any of the people who they decided to present to the audience as the ones who said, well, I told him that? Why would anyone think those are the ones he believed, especially when you know he's not looking to believe those? He's looking to basically to believe anyone who's supporting what he's saying. We're trying to figure out here, what does he genuinely think in his heart of hearts? And we know he's starting with the presumption that he was robbed. So anyone who's going to confirm that, even if there's only a handful of people, he's likely going to attach more credibility to them than to someone who's like, well, someone like Raffensperger saying, I looked into it and we looked into all of these things when we know that he didn't look into it. So who do you think he's going to believe when we're trying to figure out what was going through his mind? It's so dumb.
That if the fraud didn't work, it wasn't attempted fraud. Do you believe that?
You're presuming it's fraud.
Because if Trump overturned the election.
I went through this. They created those documents. I went through it with you in response to your super chat. They created those documents because December 14th was a deadline. It was a technical deadline under state law that if you fail to present your slate of electors to sign off on who you're voting for, you can no longer do it anymore. So we have a situation where December 14th comes around in the state of Pennsylvania, in the state of Michigan. The electors are sitting there saying there's all these fights that are happening now. You're sitting here with the benefit of hindsight from 2024, and I'm saying you have to put yourself in their seat in December 14th, 2016, and what they know at that point in time. And what they know at that point in time is, wow, the state government is claiming that Biden won, but there's all these claims which are saying that he did not win, and that there's a lot of crazy shenanigans that happened in order for them to come up with this state vote. And we don't know whether this can be exposed tomorrow, next week, the week after that. Hence, what happens if it is exposed? And these electors, the 20 electors that they're sending from the state of Pennsylvania for Biden, turn out that no, they have no legitimacy because they recognize that the state of Pennsylvania got their stuff screwed up, and that's all exposed. What happens at that point? If it comes out, if we learn on December 23rd that Trump is the one who won, Now we're sitting at December 14th. What happens on December 23rd if they realize, wow, Trump really won this state by 30,000 votes? And that's established. What happens at that point? Well, if we don't sign off on this today, December 14th, there is no vote from Pennsylvania. The others would be decertified, and there would be no vote at all from Pennsylvania. And Trump would be stripped of these electoral votes. You know how we can possibly remedy that? We can possibly remedy that if we sign off on this today, December 14th. Why is that? Because there's a statutory deadline that says you have to do it by December 14th. That's what was going through their minds. That's what was going through their minds in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, in Georgia, in New Mexico, in Arizona. That's what was going through their minds. You're sitting here with the benefit of hindsight from January 6, 2024. It's a ridiculous way of looking at it when you have to sit there asking, well, what's going through their minds when they're actually doing this on December 14, 2016. It's like saying, well, why I don't understand. Why didn't you buy more protective equipment worrying about COVID back in 2012? So this way you wouldn't have had to have it, because no one knew. Then nobody knew stuff was going to happen. So we had to sort of act based on what we know today. Maybe we're not looking at the same docs. I'll pull mine up and send them to you. They said we are the duly selected electors, which is a lie. And if it's a lie that everyone knows is a lie, it's still not fraud. Figure out how to contrast it with me saying to you right now, if I hold in my hand and swear I am Donald Trump, give me money because I am Donald Trump. Is that fraud? The answer is obviously no. It's a lie. It is not fraud. If I put it in writing and swear to it in writing in front of a notary, it's still not fraud, because everybody knows it's not true. There's no deception. There's detrimental reliance. I'm reliant on your statement, your material statement. I'm reliant on that statement to my detriment. The reason you don't have detrimental reliance is because nobody is reliant on the statement, because everyone knows it's not true. Hence, it's not fraud. It's a key element to fraud. Detrimental reliance. No matter what they wrote, if they wrote, unless they signed the governor's name and signed the Secretary of State's name and took the state seal and slapped it on there, there's not even an attempt at deception. A 90-pound weakling in a wheelchair threatens to beat up the Rock at a bar. Rock files for PPO. Really? Yeah. I look for a YouTube channel on law and find a Jewish cult leader claiming it's not a cult. Go figure. Well played, Mr. Trump. Well played indeed. Well played indeed. No, you misunderstand me. I'm saying Destiny can't fathom J6 witnesses are themselves capable of what Destiny is accusing Trump of doing. Yeah. That's a fair point. That is a fair point. 7 states sent alternate electors. Only 3 filed charges. Pennsylvania and Mexico have stated there was no fraud. State laws differ, but there is a clear consensus. Prosecution doesn't mean anything. Didn't Secretary of State of Georgia promise to post the signature ballots online and never did? I don't remember that. That could be true. I don't remember. Let's put this bed. National divorce. LOL.
Here's a question.
It didn't work, then it isn't fraud. You've just called it fraud. You've defined it as fraud. And you've said, well, it didn't work, so therefore it's not fraud. It must be something else. No, that's not the case.
Okay, wait, here's a question. Let's say that he flips the election results, but there wasn't actually any rigged votes. Would that be fraud?
Really good question, isn't it?
Can Trump do anything that's fraudulent
regarding
the election?
Let's get something out. I think we need to go back to one specific thing that I need to make sure you understand. I agree on this premise.
Okay.
Joe Biden is the duly elected, constitutionally approved president of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
He is.
Yes.
Had Trump been successful and gotten all of those alternate slates of electors done, and those states flipped and been inaugurated on January 20th, Trump would be the duly elected president of the United States, according to the Constitution.
Yes.
Once that constitutional process closes at inauguration, that president is the constitutionally approved, duly elected president of the United States.
Yes.
So we have to go from that premise, because all of this boils down to trying to convince the people involved in making the decision about who gets to be president to make the decision in one's favor or not. And every single step of the way, Trump asks people to act in his favor based on his claim of voter fraud. He gives them the opportunity to follow the constitutional process, and never ever does he step outside of it. Not once.
That's
he
not
doesn't
true,
employ
though.
executive authority.
Wait.
He doesn't employ military power.
Okay.
He doesn't do anything to coerce or force anyone to
He
make a
literally
decision.
does.
What?
Can I ask you first for a concept? What is fruit of the poisonous tree mean?
Fruit of the poisonous tree is a Fourth Amendment doctrine involving the illegal obtaining of evidence leading to further evidence down the road. And it just goes to the lack of admissibility of evidence obtained from a falsely acquired piece of evidence.
Unconstitutionally acquired.
A violation of the Constitution.
If a jury convicts a man of murder, right, he is guilty of the crime of murder, and he'll go to jail for it, right? If the jury, 12 people, convict him, the court process, we agree that he's convicted of murder, he would go to jail for murder, right?
Sure.
Okay. If the man is subpoenaed, or not subpoenaed, it'd be what, a warrant for his arrest, because police officers go to a judge, they present evidence, and they say he's a suspect of the crime for the murder, and the judge signs off on the warrant. They have a right to go and arrest that man and put him in jail until they can go to court, right?
Yeah.
Okay. If in the very beginning of this investigation, the police officers unlawfully break into his house in order to secure evidence to get the initial sign off for the investigation or the warrant for his arrest, at that point, every other thing down the road from that becomes invalidated. Yes?
No, but it should, but no. There's this whole, it's law, man, it's complicated.
Wait, so you're telling me that you
about-
can't get convictions thrown out because of like bad evidentiary reasons? That's not possible. That's never happened in the history of the US?
No. See, you're doing this. The law is very gray, right?
Okay.
And there's so many different circumstances. I'm about to explain how it can work. And I hate this. I want what you said to be true. Okay. That's what I want. I'm a purist on the Fourth Amendment, like so far. But here's the issue. If police do illegally obtain evidence that leads to other evidence, it should be excluded unless there is a good faith exception that other legitimate investigative efforts could have produced the same results. And that's a stupid rule, but it exists. So there is a feasible possibility that other evidence could still be admissible, even though it was obtained due to the result of an illegal move, if there was another possible alternative that reasonable investigative efforts would have uncovered. And I hate fucking saying it, because it shouldn't be true.
And I understand that. I understand the argument probably for that if they were to break into somebody's house and saw that, he's actually got a subscription to, Bowlers Anonymous, and they decide to investigate that website and they find that there he admitted to killing his wife, and like, well, Your Honor, yeah, we should have broken into the house, but we could have feasibly come across this website and investigated. You're saying that this might be an exception where they're like, okay, sure, even though the original evidence was ill-begotten, like they could have discovered this, and we're going to let everything else stand, is essentially what you're saying.
Yeah,
right?
let's say other officers were coming at it from a different way.
Sure, yeah, okay, sure. Or collateral investigation, or usual, yeah, I understand, sure. But in the case where like you break into his house illegally and you find the glove and the knife and all of this, you theoretically could get this entire conviction overturned because all of your key, that's all I'm arguing for the Trump stuff. That if he would have gotten elected, if he would have been constitutionally certified by Pence, he would have been the president. If Pence would have thrown out the electorate slates, then they would have chosen different electorate slates. That's fine. But the beginning of this process was fraud. That's where the injury comes from. Not because they followed the Constitution later on down the line. The injury comes from them committing fraud at the beginning to taint the rest of the process.
Oh my God, Nick, if you had just said fraud requires detrimental reliance, this whole argument would have ended in 10 minutes.
You're saying that it's not fraudulent because he thinks the election was really stolen, so he can commit fraud in all these different places as long as he effects the right outcome.
He can commit fraud. That's the thing. There's this problem with, again, all of this being a constitutional question involving plenary unquestionable authority. And I know you want to breeze by that because it makes this really and messy and you want like a nice, easy answer. And I'm not here. Like
I'm okay with the plenary authority. You just keep bringing up like
you're not.
I am, because if you would have said, listen, like let's say this happens, okay? There are so many different ways that I would agree with you. If Georgia says, you know what, maybe there was fraud, we're going to okay both slates of electors and send them down. I wouldn't like it, but it's like, okay, I understand it. That's the process at least, right? If that would have happened with their plenary authority, that's fine. Now, I don't know all the legal terms. I don't know. You tell me, does plenary authority involve a DeLorean and time travel?
I'm just trying to help them understand the flaw in the logic that Destiny is approaching with here. And I wish Nick would have pointed out this entire thing about detrimental reliance. Why is this even a thing when Trump was acquitted of insurrection and fraud by jury's peers during his second impeachment? No one, he's not even been charged with fraud. This is what's such a joke. Rumble Nick said, good question, depends on what definition of is. I do agree with you that he's equivocating too much.
Because if not, then they committed fraud when they said we were duly elected. And your rationale of, well, in the future, they might have said it was okay, doesn't undo the fraudulent claim.
No, because the issue is not needing time travel, because if you have plenary authority to choose the slate of electors by the manner in which you choose, then you can simply choose the other electors. And it doesn't matter what they wrote on the paper.
Yeah, but we're not talking about the choosers. We're talking about the people that lied and said they were choosed. And listen, even if I grant you even if I grant you
to be an elector,
let's say that I grant you all of this, okay? Let's say that I grant every single thing. At the end, you have to go, well, though, I guess since they didn't choose them, it was fraud.
No, I don't think it's fraud because they didn't choose them, because those statements are irrelevant to the choosing of electors. That's what you're missing. Those statements do not prevent or empower the legislature from choosing that slate of electors, even later than they were submitted. Because no one can question the legislature.
I thought he meant like choose gum.
Choice. And this is weird because I talked about this a ton during all of the lawsuits immediately following the vote, because they're like, well, they can simply unchoose the slates of electors that were sent. They can decertify their election results. And you go, well, how do you do that? What's the mechanism that works on? How does a state decertify its electors? And everybody's convinced they could. And I'm questioning, I'm like, how do you do that? Well, the ultimate answer is you just do it. Because the state has plenary authority, specifically the state legislature has plenary authority, which means the judiciary of the state, the executive of the state, the judiciary, legislature, and executive of the federal government cannot question the way the state legislature chooses elections. It's constitutionally mandated that they have the power to do it, which means if they change their mind, they just do. And that's why it's critical to have these time-limited processes in the choosing of the next president, because if they decertified their election now, what the hell do we do, right? Like, that's a mess. Now we have this idea that, one state has decided that the president's not legitimate, blah, 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 big mess. You can't do it. You have to go through impeachment to try and get there. But as long as you are in the window of time between vote, submitting of a slate of electors, the reading of the electors, ultimately the resolving of the electors, naming the president, and then ultimately inauguration at the end, as long as you're within there and you have some sort of time for any of those processes to take place, theoretically, and we don't know if there would be some limit on this because it's never been asked, a state can withdraw its selection of the electors, certify any electors that it wants by its own choosing. That's plenary authority. And that elector slate.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that Michigan is acting completely politically. I think that they're out to try and this is a way of trying to terrify people they identify as being MAGA. This is going after what they deem right-wing, ultra MAGA.
Would be legitimate, period, because no one can question it. No one. Not even the own state judiciary can question it technically. Now, I know, obviously, the Supreme Court could come in and say that's not how it works. It's not actually a plenary authority, but that's how plenary authority works in all circumstances. So if there is a mechanism by which the state can legally choose the other slate of electors, and those fraudulent clauses have no operative power to bind the state legislature to that decision, then it's not a fraud because they can't be bound by it. They can't be induced into it. And the statements are just fluff because the state can just say, we want these guys. We don't care what that paper says. We decided what would be on the paper and we're deciding that it doesn't matter right now. And you can't fucking ask us a question about it because that's our decision. That's why it's not fraud.
I understand. You keep justifying. Yes, you keep trying to.
You do owe me $95, Joe, for crying out loud. Give me my $100. You know, I gotta say, look, if some people that don't really care about democracy being on the brink because of all the prosecutions that are going on against me. Jack Smith has been coming after me. He's been coming after me like he's crazy. He's crazy. We got a very biased judge here, very biased judge, very biased. And the only way that we can possibly win is if each and every one of you sends me $100 so that I can overcome these prosecutions. I'm being prosecuted in Mar-a-Lago. They raided my house in Mar-a-Lago. And they're just completely ignoring my rights. And everything we did was completely legal.
Tell me about Person A's power, where Person A is a state legislature that you say has plenary power to decide the electors. I'm never talking about them. None of this conversation has been about them. No, you don't. What we're talking about is Group B claiming Person A empowered them to do something. And you keep arguing Person A they could in the future. They've got unlimited power to. They could do all of this. And I'm saying, I agree. I don't know why you keep repeating those points. I agree with all that. Person B said that they had when they hadn't. That's the fraud. And then you snuck in at the end here that like,
it doesn't matter that they said that they had.
It doesn't matter if it doesn't matter. Fraud is not fraud because you don't have. Okay, hold on. If you would just say this one thing, then we can just move on to this point then too. Just tell me this. If attempted fraud doesn't count if there's no plausible way for your scheme to work. Can you just say that? And then we can just move on because that's the argument you're making. You're saying as long as like it's not.
Yes. Yeah. Because if there's no detrimental reliance, no possibility of detrimental reliance, then yes, that's correct. It's not fraud.
Reasonable that your attempted fraud would
work.
Well, then it's never attempted fraud.
I agree.
Just say that and then move on to the next thing. Because that's what you keep saying. You keep saying because it wouldn't.
You can't say that because it isn't true.
Why do you keep attesting to that?
Detrimental reliance.
Okay, here's a question.
Because
when the electors
principle doesn't apply in this case because those two statements aren't a fraud. They can't induce the outcome. It's not possible.
What do I win?
So cannot induce the outcome means that it's not fraud. It's not attempted fraud. If you can't induce the outcome.
Yes, the lie has to be material to the inducement of gaining a benefit or causing harm, which is what I said at the beginning, man.
Okay. All right.
How is that hard? The lie, the fraud is not the overall thing. The fraud is the lie, the falsehood that you tell to induce a benefit or induce a detriment.
Okay.
That's what a fraud is.
So
if those two lies can't induce it, then they don't matter.
Okay. So if I walk into a bank with $10,000 of $100 bills that are clearly fraudulent and they take the marker and this is not good,
you're
I don't get charged with
now. You said once he says that we're going to move on from this. That was fraudulent inducement. You fraudulently induced him into saying we're going to move on from it. And now you're coming back to it.
Anything for attempted fraud or whatever, the Secret Service argument, but no attempted fraud because my bills would have never gotten cash to the bank.
That's way different.
That's what you're saying. You're saying that the electorate slate, when they said we are the duly elected electors, and it's not true, because you're defending false statements by using the future time travel principle that they could go back in time.
Your analogy is shit. And here's why your analogy is shit. Your analogy is shit because the lie is that the representation is that this bill is true. That this bill is true.
Yes, like we are the certified slate of electors. Yes.
No, because
are they the certified slate of electors? Were they?
See, he's trying to say detrimental reliance. He's just not saying the phrase. Nick, say detrimental reliance. Reliance.
Wait. Tell me, were they the duly elected slate of electors?
They can't defraud anyone with those statements.
Okay, we'll get to there. But can you tell me, were they the duly slated? No, they weren't, and they said they were, right? But even though they lied there,
matter.
Okay, that's fine. So they lied there. That's fine. So they lied there. Okay.
Say reliance.
Now, going forward, okay, if they said that they were the duly elected slate of electors, all right, what was the goal of that?
Doesn't matter.
to become the duly elected slate of electors by choice of the state legislature.
By choice of the state legislature, then why didn't they go to the state legislature? Because them transmitting that to Congress says the state legislature
They did go to the state legislatures.
They were locked out. They said, "Go away. You're not welcome here."
Trump also went to the state legislatures and sent Giuliani, but they did not make the decision at that point. What was then going to happen was the constitutional process of reading the slate of electors. Then an objection was going to be levied in various states. Some actually were. Then after the events of January 6th, some that were planned were not levied in those states, like Wisconsin, for example. And at that time, Mike Pence would hopefully, according to their scheme, look at this and go, actually, we're going to send this back to the state for investigative purposes, which has actual historical precedent of a vice president.
This does not have historical precedent. That is absolutely not true.
There was an inauguration delayed until like March or May to investigate possible voter fraud back in the late 1800s or early 1900s.
That was done with a vice president unilaterally rejecting a state's electorate slate based on the sitting president falsely submitting them? I'm curious. What is the example?
Here you go.
I've heard of South Carolina and I've heard of Hawaii, but neither of those fit the bill here. It's not even close.
You went straight to the presumption of the fraudulent criminal act. And if you're presuming a criminal act, you're already going to have a problem having this debate. But here's the thing. Again, your analogy was, if I walk in with a $100 bill that's false, I hand it to them. Well, it's not a fraud because they weren't going to accept it. Except that is the lie. The lie is that this $100 bill is real. You can agree with me on that, right?
Correct. That is the lie.
Okay.
Why is that not analogous to the lie of we are the certified duly elected people?
Because no one needs that statement to be real to make the choice.
Wait, how can Pence see a slate of electors if they don't say that they're the duly certified slate of electors?
Pence has to reject the original slate.
Because there are two. Because there are two now. One that is falsely attested to being...
Actually, no. Pence has to reject the original based on an objection raised by a House member during the counting.
Wait. The House member raising an objection doesn't need a false slate of electors to raise said election. But you might need an alternate slate of electors to be chosen and ready to go so the state can certify it to be within the constitutional timeline. Well, if that's the case, then don't you think we should allow the state to do that and not a presidential candidate?
That would be...
Wouldn't that be ideal? Because that's like the process that you're supposed to follow. When you say,
it's like if you find mold on your sandwich and there's another sandwich there, it's like, oh, I'll just pick this one then.
I don't think the analogy works because there's not a state legislative process by which I create my sandwich, right?
No, there's no state process that can bind the state legislature. That's what I'm trying to tell. Authority.
Wait. There's not a process by which the state. So if I go to Georgia and I talk to anybody in the state legislature, I can say any single citizen right now can declare themselves to be a valid elector. Or would the state say, no, we've got the plenary thing that Nick has brought up 50 million times, but we didn't use it with them and we're not going to use it with you, which would make you saying that we had fraud.
No, it's
okay.
It's not fraud because they're presuming that they will be selected by the state after the original election.
How am I working backwards when you're saying it's not fraud because they think in the future that this thing will happen, which, by the way, didn't happen?
If it doesn't happen, there's no harm. There's not even an ability to cause harm.
But they
detrimental.
Tried to.
They can't.
Does that make it not fraud? Are we back at that argument because of what they did ended up not working or it couldn't have worked for some reason that is not like, is it not feasible that Pence could have, if Pence was like Trump, could Pence have said, you know what, we're going to toss these out, we're going to accept the other slate. And that the people in Congress that were certifying those votes says like, okay, yeah, we are going to accept it. That's not possible. There was no possibility of that happening.
No, there was no possibility.
Wait, I'm sorry. Restate that.
Could Pence have not just accepted the false slate of electors or just counted them?
Even if he had not, it wouldn't have been that he was defrauded. It was that he chose to do so.
Maybe. That's actually an open question. We don't know.
Well, if he would have done that, would that not have been fraudulent?
No, because he knows the truth that they were not selected by their governor.
Isn't it?
Okay, backing up. Let's back up from the legal question. Do you see from how like I don't want to invoke the dreaded common sense words. Can you not see from a moral sense that probably would be not good? That like Pence accepting a slate of electors that is in contrast to your state legislature certifying and sending in their electoral vote, that's like an immoral thing, that we probably shouldn't have the vice president or people rejecting electoral college votes. It's probably a bad thing.
Probably.
Okay.
It's probably a bad thing, right?
It's probably really bad if the president himself is the one asking that to happen so that he can stay in power in opposition to the American vote for president, right? Isn't that kind of a bad thing?
Are we talking about morality or legality?
We're talking about morality. That's why I'm saying a bad thing and not an illegal thing. It's probably a bad thing.
If we're going to talk about morality and what goes on, I have all sorts of bad things that all these people do.
I'm sure I know the whataboutisms are strong, but I'm just asking for Donald Trump. Wouldn't we say it's probably a bad thing if the president of the United States, okay, is pressuring states to change their electoral college vote so that he gets to stay president? Isn't that a bad thing? Not following any process or procedure at the foundational level of like.
It is a process or procedure.
Well, after the lie, it is, yeah.
But only if you presume it's a lie. Like if he genuinely believes that there's election fraud.
He can justify to do anything he wants if he genuinely believes it.
If it is limited to advocating for them to take up the quote unquote correct position based on his belief, yes, because they don't have to.
Well, but he wasn't just advocating it; he was helping. But you're going to use the plenary thing again. Okay. Well, listen, we're bedrock at this.
How's it not advocacy? Please choose this alternate slate of electors that we provided conveniently for you because we know
Trump cannot provide alternate slates of electors. That's not his power because he's not part of the state assembly of Georgia, Wisconsin, of any of the states that were involved or whatever, of Arizona, of any of these states. That's why not.
So you've created a legal requirement for someone to be involved to create a slate of electors that could be chosen by the Georgia legislature, which can choose literally anyone they want.
But they didn't choose them.
But they can.
But they didn't. That's why it's
fraud. You created a requirement. You created.
I didn't create the requirement. That's the requirement of Georgia. They have requirement. Wait, do you think for Georgia they just like do a lottery or you don't think they have a process by which they choose electors?
Your words. Where Trump is not part of the Georgia Assembly.
Yes.
Therefore, he can't.
I don't remember that part of
to choose a different slate.
No, no. Whoa, you just added a whole new argument. Trump can advocate for them to choose new electors.
What he did.
He didn't. He chose new electors and had them lie and send in their vote. You understand those are two totally different things, right?
Why?
Because in one, you're advocating for Party A to use their plenary power. And in two, you're taking Group B and you're trying to circumvent Party A. The circumvention of Party A's plenary power.
Party A still has to be involved. They still have to choose that slate of electors.
But they didn't.
Right, but they would have to for them to work.
Then maybe Trump should have advocated for them to choose them.
He did.
That's what he's being charged with.
That's the whole thing. He's sitting there sending people to all these states saying, you had fraud. We see it. Here's our data. We need you to look into this. We want you to decertify your election results, and we want you to choose the correct slate of electors.
Whoa.
Here's the slate of electors.
Some of those statements are okay. Some of those
fails all that.
statements are wildly not okay. Telling somebody look into voter fraud is fine. He asked them that, and they said we didn't see anything. Telling him to flip their vote, probably not fine. He asked them that, and they said no to that as well.
Who said we didn't see anything? Secretary of State, right?
Yeah.
Raffensperger.
Yes.
And election officials, right?
Yes.
Was it the state legislature who says we looked into it and didn't see anything?
I don't know.
Not in Arizona, right? Because in Arizona, they actually filed suit.
Who did?
The state legislature, actually the Speaker of the House, right?
What's the status? What is the suit alleging? And what is the remedy they're seeking?
Voter fraud in Maricopa County.
Yeah, what is
looking for overturning? Of course, they got shot down.
Oh, they got shot down
without actually having the evidence weighed. But that's
wait, without having the evidence weighed, meaning they didn't reach discovery, or they failed on evidentiary grounds and it was tossed, or because the remedy they were seeking was insane, like decertifying the entire election when they couldn't even show.
Is that insane?
Why is it an insane remedy if you have an issue with some number of votes in the county that wouldn't be outcome determinative to seek a remedy to toss out the entire state's vote? Why is that insane? Wait. What is the difference?
It was outcome
wait.
determinative.
Was okay. Where is that? And did they show any evidence of that?
Well, if you don't get to actually present evidence, then you don't get to show evidence. But
wait, what is the? How do you go to a judge? Well, okay, wait. Talk me through this because I don't know anything. I'm not a judge at all, or I'm not a lawyer at all. How do you go to a judge and file a case? What do you have to do in the beginning? Yeah, tell me. What do you have to do in the beginning parts? What do you have to show the judge for him to get to accept your case?
Pleading standards are different in every state. Some have notice pleading requirements, which just says you have to provide notice to the other party of roughly what they need to defend against. In others, you need to provide a little bit more than notice pleading. You have to have have basically the federal standard, which would be you have to have
harsh.
statements of fact that are non-conclusory, not necessarily true, just
Mhm.
statements of fact that are non-conclusory that support every element of the claim that you're trying to make, where if taken as true and uncontested would lead to a claim that would provide relief
conviction.
from the
Correct.
court.
Yes. So, okay, I agree with you. So what were the statements of fact that were made in that particular suit?
I don't remember. There were a lot of different suits, and this was what.
Well, but you
4
brought
years
up
ago?
one in particular, and you said it was
Yeah.
tossed out for bullshit reasons. My understanding is
because-
almost every single one that got tossed out for bullshit reasons because the statements of fact, none of these things even rose to the level of being remotely close to the remedies that they were seeking, which was sometimes to throw out the entire election of the state or to do an entire revote.
There are a couple very good questions asked in a couple of the lawsuits, and the majority of them were bad.
Okay.
But you don't get to say all of them were bad because the majority of them were bad, which you've done basically every
Because
time.
I'm sorry, I haven't looked at every single court case, but every single
And
one
I
that's been
haven't
brought
asked
up to
you
me,
to.
every single one that's been brought up to me that I do look at ends up being total horseshit. So I'm curious if this was just one of the ones out of the 120 others that we looked at. Maybe this was one of the ones that was really good. So I'm just curious if maybe this was a really good complaint.
It went farther than most, but
Wait, you said it went farther than most? I thought you said it didn't even make it to court. I thought you said it got tossed out because
There's a whole lot of steps that occur, but and then there were some appeals that went back and forth. There was data that was supposed to be disclosed that wasn't disclosed. The Democrat Election Committee of Maricopa County basically defied the court order. It didn't turn over stuff, and so then there was more and more and more, and it went through a lot of steps. Ultimately, I do think it was dismissed prior to pre-trial. You're trying to break these cases down into these small component parts or these easy, pithy ways to dismiss them. The reason I asked you earlier, by what mechanism would you challenge an election in any case, is because no one actually knows. No one could tell you how to bring a competent case to challenge voter fraud in the United States in 2020.
I disagree. That's absolutely not true.
No one can do it.
No, you can't show any evidence of, hey, like here are some statements of fact that, if true, would amount to the crimes that we're attesting, and then this is the remedy that we're seeking, or how we want the courts to address it. That's not possible. How are so many cases brought?
No one knows how to do it. No one knew how to do it. The legitimate cases that were brought, Texas v. Georgia, great questions, great case. Supreme Court has original jurisdiction and just decided it didn't. Phenomenal. Then you've got Pennsylvania.
Wait, hold on. I'm sorry. Just to be clear, I'm sorry. The Supreme Court has original jurisdiction to decide how states run their elections, or
decide a dispute between states.
What is that? But there is no dispute between the states.
Yes, there is.
Texas has no. Wait. I want you to say that. I'm sorry.
Is.
Do you believe that some states should be able to dictate to other states how they run their elections?
They have a right to demand that you follow your own laws, not to write your laws for you, not tell you what laws you should have. But the argument was that they have a right to demand that you follow whatever laws you have on your books. It's that simple. Do I, as the state of Texas, have a right to demand that you follow your own election laws? Not, you can write whatever laws you wrote, but whatever you wrote, that's what you have to follow. That's what Texas versus Pennsylvania was.
I just want to hear you say that, if you believe that to be the case. You think that Texas should be able to tell Georgia how to run their election?
That's not what Texas was trying to do.
What were they trying to do?
Texas was alleging that Georgia's.
And they keep saying Georgia, but it's Pennsylvania. But I think it was applied to Georgia as well. They brought up 6 states.
Refusal to investigate the fraud, or it was Georgia's voter fraud itself, or the electors that were chosen illegitimately negatively impacted Texas citizens or Texas electors' ability to have their votes matter. Like, they're disenfranchising the electors.
Does Texas's voters have the right that the person that they vote for becomes president?
No, they have the right to make sure that their electors are not wrongfully diluted, because you're sending forward electors who are not legally chosen under your state laws.
That's not the question.
I just don't understand how. Let's say California decides to make it so that illegal immigrants can vote in their election. Would California?
I think that'd be really interesting. If California only picked electors based on illegal immigrant vote.
Would California have standing to sue Texas because Texas isn't counting the votes of their illegal citizens?
No, the point is follow your own law. Follow your own, whatever law you pass in your state. You must follow that law.
It's a different question.
Why? Wait, why?
You don't. It's an illegal elector. It's really that simple.
a different question. Maybe California feels like their illegal immigrants' votes are being disenfranchised, and because other legal immigrants in Texas aren't allowed to vote. I thought they had. What happened to the plenary authority argument that these states have plenary authority to determine how they want to run their elections and pick their electors? Why would Texas have more of a? Then why would Texas have a say over that? What if Georgia just says, "Yeah, there was voter fraud. We love it. We're going to pick our people anyway. Screw you." Why would Texas have any standing there whatsoever?
Well, they have standing. First of all, standing requirements are bullshit.
What do you mean?
General,
why?
Standing is a fiction created by the courts to reduce the amount of lawsuits that they have to hear. There's a whole bunch of problems with the standing. Like if the United States creates an unconstitutional tax law, for example, right? And it affects everybody the same. You have no standing as a voter or as a taxpayer to sue because it affects everybody the same. Did you realize?
Thanks for stopping by, Worcestershire. See you tomorrow.
Is that?
If it affects everybody the same, that my guess would be you'd have to challenge it, what, on like constitutional grounds?
You can't. You don't have standing to bring the claim in the first place because you're a taxpayer. So you're not particularly injured since all taxpayers are presumably under the same.
How were cases brought again challenging the constitutionality of the Affordable Care Act?
Because people were particularly injured, they claimed, by being forced to purchase or make a purchasing decision, et cetera, et cetera.
How can some people say they're particularly injured by undue tax burdens?
That's the issue.
Well, they actually lost on the Affordable Care Act on the tax and spend power.
Yeah, but they didn't lose because they couldn't prove standing. But you're saying that you wouldn't have standing if every person is affected in the U.S.? You're telling me that there's no way. Yeah,
you have to have a particularized. I'm telling you what the standing requirement is. You have to have a particularized injury. So if everybody's equally affected, this is part of the problem of the federal election lawsuits that were brought was they're dismissed on standing grounds. They're like, well, you don't have standing as a voter to challenge your own state's election results. You're like, well, but my vote wasn't counted because there was fraud. And they said, sorry, you're not particularly injured because the fraud affected everybody in your state equally. That was actually Georgia, the Lynn Wood case. And I don't think that was a good case. I think Lynn Wood's a quack, but it was rejected on standing grounds. And we never got to whether or not the merits of the case mattered. And this is why it's frustrating to talk to people who are just like, well, they were all thrown out. Well, a judge didn't like them. Well, they didn't present evidence. They didn't do this. The standing and laches dismissals of these cases weren't particularly helpful. The Pennsylvania case was really amazing because Pennsylvania literally subverted their own constitutional requirement on absentee ballot, the absentee ballot law that was passed as a constitutional measure had not fully been approved by a second vote according to their constitution, which would make it which would make it part of their constitution. It was a requirement to amend the Pennsylvania Constitution. It went up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, who just basically said, well, we don't care that we subverted our own constitution to pass a measure that would impact a federal election. And then the justices decided laches. We're not going to go ahead and hear this Pennsylvania case because it's too late. And it's still during the pendency of the election. But this is a really good question. Can a state subvert its own constitution?
So then just to be clear, you think that anybody should be able to bring suit to anybody else in the United States at any point in time?
The logic in saying that standing is a BS thing is if the purpose of courts is to enact justice, then why would an argument that's being presented by this person be different from an argument presented from that person? Standing is you're the wrong person. You don't have a legitimacy here. If the objective of a court is to find truth, to impart actual justice, then even if the person who's wronged is mute, who cares? Why is that relevant? We're trying to get justice to get done here. That's why standing is such a silly thing. Also important to note that about Texas versus Pennsylvania, the question wasn't regarding presidential election, but rather was focused on Senate representation. I don't recall that part of it.
Any party should be able to bring, because you think all standing is bullshit? Is that what I got from that?
You understand that standing isn't a requirement in state court.
What do you mean by isn't a requirement in state court?
The standing is a federal requirement.
And
so if
I don't have to prove that I'm an injured party in a state thing, any two people can sue.
You have to show that you're an injured party, sure. If there's no injury, you can have it dismissed.
Wait, I'm sorry. Okay, I might just understand. I thought that proving you're an injured party is part of proving that you have standing to bring a case to the court. Is that not?
Proving you're an injured party is required. Yes.
Okay.
Proving you have a particularized injury for federal lawsuits is a different and heightened form.
Sure, but you said state lawsuits. You said in state lawsuits, you don't have to prove standing, so anybody can file any case on behalf of any person or file a case against any person at any point in time.
To allege injury in state lawsuits, you don't have to have a particularized injury that you would have to have in the federal lawsuits. Federal standing requirements only exist in federal law. So when I say standing is bullshit, you're like, you think anybody can sue anybody? Well, that exists. It exists in state law right now in every state.
Okay, sure.
Standing requirement.
So if you're saying that if your issues with the federalized rules, then none of these election suits, or only a few of them, had to do with federal rules, right? Weren't these state election suits? They were bringing the next state.
Giant mix of both, but
I thought the vast majority, like 95%, were state lawsuits. It was citizens trying to sue their county boards or their election boards. Like I thought, like the vast majority of them. There aren't that many federal ones. I thought there was a handful of federal ones. Am I wrong on that? Like some states trying to sue others. I know the Texas.
It doesn't matter how many bad ones were dismissed because they were ludicrous.
I mean, it kind of does.
No, it doesn't.
It kind of does.
Okay, if I bring 3 good lawsuits and you bring 500 bad ones going for the same sort of end game, do your 500 bad ones have any impact on my 3?
If they were brought by the same person, potentially.
They're not, though. You just said they were brought by individual citizens to their own state. So they're not brought by the same person.
I'm focusing on the 62 that Trump's campaign brought.
They didn't.
Because that's
a lie. He didn't bring 62. He brought like 4.
Who's being charged with obstruction and the conspiracy, not all of the other individual citizens that brought their court cases. So for those,
talking about the individual citizens.
For those individuals, no, they can. Okay, good one. For all the individual citizens.
Wait, what did I missed that? Hold on a second. I want to go back to
that. Individual citizens that brought their court cases. So for those,
talking about the individual citizens.
For those individuals, no, they can. Okay, good one. For all the individual citizens. No, hold on. You're the one that's been jumping around like crazy on all of these about the federalized things versus the state things versus the blah, 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 blah. Okay, you've been jumping around all of it.
I have to explain various concepts of law. It's complicated and irritating. You're not a lawyer. Your audience isn't lawyers, so I'm not trying to be condescending, but this shit's really fucking complicated.
I understand what you're saying, but you have to understand that even as a lawyer, you're giving novel answers to these things that I don't think the vast majority of people would agree with. I don't think the vast majority of lawyers would say, that's fine, but I'm just saying that like, this is not like your opinions of Nick Rekieta, the lawyer. These are your personal opinions of like Nick Rekieta, like the libertarian, right? That like standing is bullshit, or that.
My standing is bullshit but that's legally inoperative. But then you followed up with it, so I'm going to answer you.
Sure.
Not dick.
Okay, sure. I know, but I'm just saying that like, or the idea that like attempted fraud is not illegal as long as the fraud doesn't have like a reasonable way of.
That's a legal statement. That's a legal statement based on detrimental reliance being a necessary element to fraud.
Of like taking fruition or whatever. Like these are unique opinions to you. Not
no, that's opinion of every court ever.
Like as a lawyer, I understand these things.
No, as a lawyer, if you're defending an alleged fraud, and they go, "Here's the lie," and you go, "But that lie can't induce a fraud." Yes, that's a defense.
But okay, I'm doing my best to figure out what's going on because I'm not a lawyer, okay? But here's what it sounds like you're trying to sell me, and here's what it sounds like the actual rule is. And maybe I'm wrong. Tell me, okay? When you say that fraud can't induce what's happening, it sounds like you're trying to sell
that lie can't.
That lie can't induce fraud. It sounds like what you're trying to sell me is if the lie is such that it can't ever that the fraud can't come to fruition, then it can't be a lie.
Yes, I'm sorry, that you cannot be deceived. If there cannot be detrimental reliance, yes, that's correct. Yes, that's law. That is black letter law. That is not just the law in all 50 states and in the federal court system. That is a law in England. That is a law that goes back thousands of years. Yes, fraud means detrimental reliance.
Lie can't be a fraud. You're saying that if somebody tells a lie and it can't turn into an illegal act or whatever, that lie is like somehow not fraud.
Yes.
If the lie cannot turn into an illegal act, it cannot be a fraud.
Correct. Yes. That's what you're saying. I don't think that's the rule.
That is 1,000% the rule.
I don't think that's the rule.
I'm 8 feet tall with my dick dragging behind me. Definitely.
I don't think that's the rule. What it sounds to me,
of course,
okay, and I might be wrong, and I welcome other people to come in.
Yeah,
okay. Here's what it sounds like the rule actually is. It sounds like what the rule actually is if you're telling a lie that isn't ever reasonably leading a person to commit like a fraudulent activity or whatever, then that particular lie can never amount to fraud. For instance, if I tell somebody, can you please go to the bank and get me $5,000? If that person goes to the bank and robs it, and then they come back and they say, here's your $5,000, and somebody tries to take me to court, I can say, hold on, me asking them to go to the bank, that doesn't amount to me.
That's got nothing to do with this at all.
Any sort of like illegal claim or whatever bullshit here, because I'm not like that can't induce the fraudulent activity of them robbing the bank, or it wouldn't be robbing the bank, or submitting a fake check or anything like that, right? My lie can't reasonably lead to them submitting a fake check. We'll say they do with a fake check.
Where did you
right?
lie? You sent them to the bank to get money. That wasn't a lie.
Sure.
Moore v. Harper, 2023, and a 6-3 ruling, justices affirmed the power of state courts to review state laws governing federal elections. In the decision, the court affirmed judicial review of elections. Yeah, but that doesn't mean they can just ignore. That doesn't mean that a court can just misapply black letter law, state law about elections. Nor does it mean that you can have an EO which would overturn the black letter law of a state election.
I can't think of a one-to-one analogy, but the analogy is messy.
I've got one.
Go ahead. Say it. Yeah, go ahead.
This happened. This happened in Minnesota.
Go ahead.
Okay? There's a CEO of a company. It was a medical device company. They make stints, right? And each stint, depending on how long and how the gauge of the stint has to be individually approved. Well, it doesn't have to. Gets individually approved by the FDA for advertisement for the type of treatment that it's used for, right?
Okay.
Accept that premise, because the right was more, this is what happens.
Sure. A stint gets submitted to the FDA by a company, and the stint is approved by the FDA for a medical treatment.
And yeah, then the FDA will say you can advertise this stint for this thing, these particular treatments. So this medical device company, they make these stints, and one sales team.
Riff Raff says, "Please can we move on? This sounded interesting, but it's wearing me out." I'll tell you right now, I'm plowing through another 40 minutes of this. This is what I'm doing tonight. If it's not your thing, I get it. But I said I'm reviewing this, so that's what I'm doing.
In Colorado, consisting of one sales manager and 3 salespersons who they market directly to doctors who would, doctors and purchasing managers at hospitals who would buy these stints, right? They, the manager creates a sales meeting document that says this stint is FDA approved for treatment of this coronary condition. And he gives those to his 3 salespeople. And they have the sales meeting of rah fest, and then they go out and sell. There's no evidence that document has ever been to a doctor at all. That document, however, finds its way in the hands of a federal prosecutor. Federal prosecutor prosecutes the CEO of this company for making a false statement of advertising, suggesting that this stint is approved to treat a certain medical condition.
Okay. That it was approved by the FDA too, or not approved by the FDA too?
That it was approved to treat a certain medical, or that it was FDA approved. That it was FDA approved. Okay. That was the statement, was that it was FDA approved. And then it was marketed in this document to treat a list of conditions. Now, they had not received particular approval on one of the conditions that's in the document, but it was an FDA approved stint, just not on that particular thing. Okay. So he's charged with this crime. He's federally indicted, 18 months of federal indictment. It cost $20 million for the defense because there were, I think, 40 different states in which this place operated where they had to do depositions. A long trial, big mess. When it comes down to it, turns out the prosecution makes their case. They allege they made this false statement about FDA approval for treatment. So it's a lie, right? It's not true. It's not approved for that treatment, but it is FDA approved, but not for that particular thing. So they definitely, like, this sales manager lied on behalf of the company. That lie occurs. Okay. The problem is it's not illegal to tell that lie.
It's not illegal to say the lie that the FDA approved this treatment, and then in a separate statement on the same paper say this treatment treats this thing.
Yep. It's not illegal. It is a recommendation of the FDA that they obtain specific approval for the specific treatments, but otherwise it's an off-label treatment. You see off-label treatments in prescription drugs all the time, right? Doctors are able to use their expertise to determine that a particular drug might be beneficial to someone, even if it's not an FDA-approved treatment. Like, you know about that, right? Like, I think everybody knows that there's off-label treatments for pharmaceuticals, right?
I'm aware of that. I don't know if you're allowed to say a drug is FDA approved and then advertise it for an off-label thing.
You're not advertising it technically. for the off-label thing.
Like if I were to go to somebody with some Adderall and say, hey, Adderall, this is FDA approved. Take it and it'll help you lose weight. Isn't that a fraudulent statement?
Well, you didn't say it was FDA approved for losing weight, did you? Here's the crazy thing.
Okay. How did the judge rule on this? Or how did the jury rule on this or whatever? What was the...
Not guilty on all counts.
Interesting.
Because it's not illegal to have an off-label use. They had FDA approval. The FDA had a recommendation that you obtain specific approval. But my point here is that a federal prosecutor went after this guy, CEO of a medical device company, made his life into a wreck, cost him $20 million, none of which is recoverable, even though it was a completely malicious prosecution. None of which is recoverable. He's only able to defend it because he's a head of $1 billion company. There was no crime. There was no crime at all because that statement, that lie could not possibly lead to a fraudulent result. Can't do it. The purpose in all of this, Destiny, is to let you know, because it doesn't seem like you do, that for a fraud to occur, that the lie in question, the false representation, must be able to must be able to induce a party to an act that will cause a detriment or a benefit.
Detrimental.
Those two statements that you keep talking about, that they assembled at the Capitol and that they were elected by the legislature,
I don't believe your definition of fraud and won't look it up. So I'll just spew my idea what fraud is and base all my arguments off my incorrect definition of fraud. Great argument. Yeah, that's pretty much what we're seeing here. It just doesn't sound right to me. It just doesn't sound right to me.
Not induce the legislature to choose them as a slate of electors. They just can't. The legislature can choose them as a slate of electors, knowing that they didn't do it beforehand and knowing that they didn't meet at the Capitol because they have the authority to do so. So no harm can possibly occur from this. It cannot induce it. Even though the legislature may have imposed a requirement on itself to say, well, here's what our form is going to look like for electors.
It looks like
Similarly, the president can probably appoint more justices than 9, even though the Judiciary Act says there's only 9. I'm not trying to jump here, but I'm giving you an analog into where plenary authority conflicts with a process that is created. Just because there's a Judiciary Act that has been amended to say we have 9 Supreme Court justices does not prevent Joe Biden from nominating another justice and the Senate from approving them, because they can't be bound by this rule. You can't do it.
Okay, so then what you're essentially saying then is all of the parts of these indictments based on this is politically trumped up. The prosecution, the judge, none of them have any idea about how fraud works. They're all misunderstanding. And because the state legislatures at any point in time could have said, well, we're going to go with this alternate slate of electors that all lied when they said they were the duly elected ones, but they could be in the future.
Can you think of any reason a prosecutor would want to be the prosecutor that indicts and convicts Donald Trump outside of just getting good justice for the country?
I mean, I can think
of
that.
Any reason?
Yeah, of course. Can you think of any reason why Trump's DOJ, all of his intelligence agencies, 90% of his actual legal counsel, everybody in the White House, all of his own appointments, all of his own VPs, DOJ, all of these people were telling him consistently that you didn't win the election. All of the state representative, Raffensperger, people that are lifelong Republicans, all these people. At the end of the day, if we're going to play this like, well, isn't it weird that this happened? Or don't you think this might be the case? Isn't the most obvious outcome that Trump was lying the entire time and he just wanted to stay in power? Doesn't that literally explain every single part of this, every single action so cleanly and smoothly, and it makes sense in every single part of the story, rather than assuming that there are 500 different malignant actors lying under oath, lying to the media, all collaborating behind the scene? No evidence of any of this, by the way. Like, wouldn't that make the most sense?
That's a false choice. Would it similarly make the false choice or similarly make sense that Donald Trump legitimately believed there was elector fraud, even if he was wrong?
If he
legitimately believed it and pursued it to the end that he felt constitutionally he was able to do.
If that was the case, then Donald Trump should be under full-time care from a 24/7 keeper that doesn't let him out of the house because he might wander into traffic. If a man can be that delusional that you have more information available to you at your fingertips than any other human being in all of human history.
Maybe that extra information is why he thinks it's fraud. Maybe that's why. It's information that you wouldn't hear from the J6 committee, but maybe that's why he thinks there's fraud. There's actually a whole list of bases of fraud that he put out just this last week.
And every single piece of that information apparatus is returning you the exact same result from every state, from every county, from every elected official, from every appointed official, from your re-election campaign. Then at some point you go, you know what? This dude is either lying or he's fucking insane. Those are the only two options. About that? Yeah.
We have two mechanisms by which we could remove a president for having that delusional belief.
We're not removing a president, though. We're charging a man with crimes.
We haven't even gotten into whether or not you can charge him with a crime for this.
Well, I personally don't think that the president is above the law. So I think if he committed crimes,
he wouldn't be above the law. Again,
I'm sorry. I don't think that the law has I'm sorry. I don't believe that the law has a carve out that the president can commit any crime that he wants and he doesn't get charged for it, because we could hypothesize that in service of president, maybe that actually is the role of the president, is to pressure Georgia election board officials with knowingly false data to circumvent their election.
Look at how he frames this question. Knowingly false data.
Judge will, and maybe they'll throw it out. You could be right. Maybe the judge will like, no, actually, Trump has immunity from basically every single possible thing that he could do, because we could surmise that anything could be the role of the president.
He's a witch because we put this carrot nose on him and the hat.
Right? So, I mean, that's possible.
Well, it's funny how you use
look at the nose.
Language.
Look at the carrot nose.
Pithily make your point, but the cool thing about civil presidential immunity is that the pithy, sarcastic language that you just used to assume the answer is used in favor of the president in that respect.
It's not a
and
cult.
So likely, if they do find that criminal immunity does exist for the president, which seems possible because in the civil immunity decision, they actually alluded to the very likely outcome.
Is this an Obama blowing people up issue that you were raising?
President has that criminal immunity. It just wasn't the question before the court at the time. The funny, sarcastic thing is they would take this sarcastic approach in favor of the president in that one. And so,
do you think there's a decent chance that these are just going to be thrown out then on that immunity thing?
Oh yeah.
If the Supreme Court finds that the president has criminal immunity similar to civil immunity, which is one of three options, again, no immunity, similar to civil immunity, or full immunity, absent impeachment. Those are all options that they could do. But if they do the one that looks like the most likely outcome, where anything within the outer perimeter of an act as president, which means anything even plausibly within the scope of the president is presumed to be inside the scope of the president and cannot be indicted. He cannot be indicted for it. He cannot be questioned about it. It will automatically fall in his favor. The sarcastic, cute, entertaining way you just asked that question would be stated like this. When did Donald Trump just genuinely believe that he had a constitutional responsibility to uphold and defend the integrity of the election? And he would do so employing the DOJ, even to the point where if he disbelieved his own people as the chief law enforcement officer of this country, he had an obligation when all else failed to tell everybody in the nation that there was a fraud, to try and lobby individual legislatures to go ahead and use their constitutional authority in any way possible, and even to the extent of producing slates of electors that could be qualified by those legislatures, or even maybe picked by Mike Pence under his questionable constitutional authority. He believed that. It's presumed that he believed that. Therefore, he is immune from suit. If they go with the civil standard, again, the cute, sarcastic, and entertaining way you phrase the question gets phrased, except in the exact opposite way. And
okay, that's possible. If they ruled with that, would you support that ruling?
If they ruled with that, if they ruled that
that he has that immunity, yeah,
100%.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, he goes to court.
Actually, say I would go with the Supreme Court ruling that the president has immunity from all criminal acts absent an impeachment.
Okay, so he walks into court.
I don't think they will.
Okay, Giuliani's there. His face is put together. Sidney Powell in the row behind. Okay, they make their argument. Day one, judge decides to throw it out. He says, "Actually, we've thought about this. He has immunity."
Trump is walking out of the courthouse, and right there is the presidential motorcade. Biden grabs Trump and his entire legal team, throws them in the back of the van, and then ships them off to Guantanamo and imprisons him there, and his family too, and all of his legal team for the rest of their lives. Mm-hmm. Would you support his ability to do that? Because as president, he kidnapped them because he thinks he has legitimate fear that they might try to cause another January 6th riot in the future. You'd support the ruling on that too. Biden is taken to prison, or Biden is charged with false imprisonment, kidnapping, all this. And the judge rules him. He's like, well, he's the president, reasonably, especially on matters of national security. Yeah, I guess, maybe he really did think that another January 6th is going to happen.
He should be impeached.
Impeach him.
Okay. But if he survives the impeachment process, you're good. There's no criminal charge there. That's fine.
It's very uncomfortable to think about.
No, hold on. It's not uncomfortable. You should easily say, yes, of course, the president should be allowed to do anything, especially if he survives the impeachment.
Why should the legal thing always be comfortable?
Well, if you're principled, it's comfortable. I'm sorry. If you're being partisan, it's not comfortable.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Wait.
I'm sorry. Wait, did you state a principle obligation to the law earlier when you said that if he gets immunity, it's because of these, or was it just because you like Donald Trump?
No, I'm not even the biggest fan of Trump at all.
Okay, then principally, we should be able to say, yeah, Trump should be allowed to do this and Biden should be allowed to do this, right? Easy.
I did say Biden should be allowed to do that. Impeach him. If they have immunity from criminal suit, impeach him.
Okay.
And then once they're impeached, according to the Constitution, they can be charged criminally after that.
Mm-hmm. What if in the course of that, what if Biden sees that he's going to be impeached? The vote is it's like 55%. What if Biden really does feel like the country is going to be destroyed and he orders the assassination of 20% of Congress that votes against him? You'd be okay with that as well, right? To prevent the impeachment from going the wrong way?
Would it be okay with Biden ordering an assassination?
Legally, in a legal sense. Obviously, morally, we're not okay. But legally, you'd be like, yeah, he's got immunity from it. He's defending the country. He can order assassinations. Obama did it to that one dude overseas, right? Why couldn't Biden do it?
Yeah, it's a good question. Why can't he?
Maybe the president shouldn't be above all criminal prosecution. Maybe
that's not a criminal. It's not a criminal question. It's a political question.
The president ordering people to go get killed. What if the president did it himself, or he told a guy to go kill them? That's a criminal question. Do you think the president should be allowed to do that because he genuinely fears for the safety of the nation?
Impeach him.
Well, they can't because he keeps killing all the people that are going to vote against him in the impeachment proceedings.
Isn't that uncomfortable?
No, it's wacky, and I don't think the judge.
How do you stop? Like legitimately though, how do you stop him? So the similar question, I'm entertaining your hypothetical here, but the similar question is simple. Well, every time he's going to get criminally prosecuted, he just orders a military sniper to shoot the judge in the face.
Yeah,
every time. Well, how could you ever prosecute this guy, right? Because every time he's going to go to court, everybody gets just murdered in the court. Just a JDAM hits the courthouse and just kills it.
We'd probably arrest him, right?
How? He surrounds himself with Secret Service and special forces, and every arresting authority comes after him. They just get shot in the face. Just a pile of bodies.
Well, at that point, we're in a full-on coup environment, and I guess we bring the military out. We see if they side with Biden or Congress. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah,
what do you mean?
You nailed it. Yes, no, you actually, thank you so much. You're 100% right. And this is the scariest part of the presidency. And I love that you said that because you think I'm joking, but I was leading right to this thing. The president's power is the manifest will of the country that he represents.
This is part of what I was
limited by the manifestation of that will,
Nick
but it is similarly empowered by the manifestation of that will. And if the political will of the country aligns with the president, no matter what, he has so much power to do exactly what you just said.
De facto or de jure? You think that are you saying that if he's the president, he's popular enough, he can do whatever? Are you saying by letter of the law, he actually has the power to do whatever he wants if he's popular enough?
Look at Destiny learning his Latin terms of de facto or de jure. De jure means by operational law versus de facto means by operational fact, meaning pragmatically, you can't stop it.
He's constrained by Congress through impeachment.
And impeachment, it should be the only check on...
It is the only check on presidential power because Congress can pass laws all day. If the president doesn't do it, what happens?
Well, I guess we haven't tested that yet, right?
Bush did not. We can agree. Bush did not faithfully execute the Clean Air and Water Act, right?
I don't know the details of that. I'll assume what you're saying is true. I'm assuming what you're saying is true, sure.
Yeah. Does anybody think that George Bush was great on environmental concerns that the EPA would be trying to accomplish. I mean, he notably scaled back. He was sued by the Sierra Club, for example, for failing to protect coastal waters, I think in New Jersey, somewhere in the Northeast.
Doesn't the Congress try to check the president if he's not doing like a good faith adherence to things?
You'd think so.
Well, do they not? Hold on, that's not.
And here we are with our border
issues. Try
issues.
to do that if the president isn't like enforcing a law that Congress wants them to, or if Congress made a law that said marijuana is legal all throughout the U.S. and the president's like, well, the DA is not going to change their policy. Like, wouldn't Congress or somebody attempt to pass a law or hold accountable? Or
yeah,
what would they do?
Look at our border. Look at our border.
I don't know. Have we? I guess.
Yes, this happened tons of times, but it's happening right now on the border, right? Joe Biden is not faithfully executing the Immigration Naturalization Act and the border protection laws. That's why Texas is trying to pass its own laws, and now they're fighting Texas.
Can't you remove the president from office?
How?
Yeah, by impeachment.
Okay.
Thank you. That's the thing, though, right? Impeachment only exists with the manifest political will overcoming the president. Correct? But you have to manifest a political will that's greater than his.
Real Patriots Party says Joe seems to be a very culty place for a cult that's not a cult at all and doesn't proclaim to be a cult, but it's a very nice cult if it were to ever be a cult, which I'm not saying it is. It's just not at all a cult.
I don't understand what the. I mean, not necessarily. I don't know what you mean by manifest a greater political will. It's for impeaching somebody. You just need the votes in Congress. I don't know what you mean by manifesting.
That is political will, right?
I mean, well, it depends on what you're talking about, right? Like if 99% of the country wanted to vote for Donald Trump because he did something that everybody loved, but Congress is still 2 years behind their election cycle, is it the manifest will of the people if they vote to impeach him? Or if people in Congress decide to vote to impeach him, even though the people don't want him to, we can imagine congressmen voting against the will of the people, right? So there's a lot of processes by which people could theoretically circumvent the will of the people, depending on what you decide the will of the people to be.
Correct. And what happens?
Heck.
When someone says no in government. Because law is just paper. So what happens when someone says, it's really easy to say arrest him. It's really easy to say impeach him. It's really easy to say do this, do that. But we just take for granted that all this stuff works.
Well, I think we take it for granted because we're not used to people like so flagrantly abusing it. But I mean, I imagine that if they do, then other laws will be drafted or other laws will be passed, and then we'll have other mechanisms in place. We feel like these types of leaders are going to be voted on in the future, right?
Yeah, you'd think, unless they liked it. That's what I'm talking about. It's scary.
Well, didn't they shore up the ECA a little bit? Didn't they add 7 lines to that because they're like, we're not entirely sure if the vice president could do this particular thing in the future, so we're going to amend this accordingly?
And does it have any effect at all?
Well, I mean, theoretically, if the president says he wants to do something and does whatever he wants, does it? I mean, at some point, I guess, yeah. Okay, but you have to start shooting people, right? But
we're getting into that. That's an absurdum argument that we were talking about, and I like it. Because it really does, because you were asking how can it be uncomfortable, but it is. Like the reality is that our country allows for very uncomfortable outcomes because everybody operates on a handshake to prevent civil war effectively. That's what goes on most of the time.
Well, yeah, but like, I mean, but what you're talking about, this applies to we've like reduced this so much that this applies to every single system of governance, right?
Kinda.
Yes, absolutely. Like every communist, every dictatorship, every authoritarian, every Democrat, like everything. Yeah. And when you say it's just paper, that's also true, right? A parchment guarantee. Everything is just paper. At the end of the day, it's who has the bullets or who has the batons, right? Sure, that's true.
But that is true, but it's also just because it applies to other systems of government that eventually violence will out, right? Eventually violence will out applies to everything. My point, though, is that we have a lot of faith in what is written down or what is done here, but the mechanisms that we actually have that are the legal process. Impeachment is the constitutional process to remove a president. There isn't another one, which is the single strongest claim for criminal immunity for a president that exists. I'm not saying that the Supreme Court will find it. I'm saying that is the single strongest claim, that impeachment is specifically put into the Constitution to remove a president. And it is an entirely political question because if a president is acting in accordance with the will of the country and they don't want to remove him, there you go. That's what happens. If he's not acting in accordance with the will of the country and the law, then they'll just remove him.
I mean, if I run down your same argument, then I can just say we can also find a remedy in the courts.
If they have the political will of the people, if they are voting on presidents that are installing these, appointing these federal judges, if the local state people aren't voting out their judges or their governors, then the same argument that you just made that the president could theoretically do anything, I could use like, well, the courts also could find Trump guilty and convict him of all these crimes.
Kind of, except no, because again, what I was getting to is that we have process.
I think you're still mistaken. I think if you review Texas versus Pennsylvania, you'll see that I was right about the illegal issue that was being presented to the Supreme Court. So it definitely was the presidential election. And the harm was because it's not because the VP on the ticket is a tiebreaker in the Senate. It dilutes the Texas vote. It was that Pennsylvania did not operate under their own laws and that their electors would be diluting Texan. Their electors were illegal, and that, as Bush v. Gore pointed out, that if you have an illegal person who's not legally able to participate in a vote, participating and dilutes your vote, hence our vote is being diluted, we have standing. That was what Texas was about. We have standing to demand that Pennsylvania follow its own laws. That's what Texas versus Pennsylvania was about.
That as long as the Constitution is followed, these processes are there, they do exist. The confusing part of all this, and this is what I tried to get to this way earlier, and I'm gonna have to go really soon.
Yeah,
but this is interesting stuff to me because we write down laws, like you just mentioned, 7 new lines added to the Electoral Count Act, right?
Yeah.
Because they're like, oh, we don't want Mike Pence to do this, but that doesn't mean anything. If Mike Pence has an authority, or the vice president has an authority under the Constitution to count and certify or whatever,
they passed a law saying you can't, that law is meaningless.
Then he has that authority. The extent of that authority can't be constrained by Congress. Like Congress can't just make a law that says this is what it is. This is what it is. I mean, they could write the law all day. I was getting to this with the fucking Judiciary Act. They can write a law that says there's 9 justices, but there can be more. Because you can't constrain the president by just writing a law. If it's in the Constitution that the president has the sole power of appointment and that the Senate has the sole power.
This is what I was bringing up earlier.
I understand what you're saying. I'm just saying that like you've reduced everything to nothing. Like anything can happen.
I haven't.
You have though. Congress could theoretically, Congress could write a law and pass it and say, actually, Congress nominates a prime minister, and it could go for a judicial review, and the Supreme Court would say, actually, yeah, and now you've lost the president. So why couldn't that happen? So, but at this point, we can do anything. I mean, theoretically, right? We could say that tomorrow a Supreme Court decides to hear a case for whether or not a person can have an abortion, saying, I'm aborting this baby because it's black. And does that violate its civil rights? And in their penning their opinion, maybe Alito says, you know what, actually, we looked at this case and we actually decided that I'm going to be the president of the United States. And then Alito could pass that to take control of the armed forces. I mean, that could happen, right? It could happen, right?
No.
It's on paper. But I mean, like, well, I mean, anything could, anything. Yeah, but like, what does any of this mean? I mean, like, at this point, we're in like the absurdo land, like where anything could happen and anything could do anything. Like, what?
You're taking it to absurdo land because you took it to absurdo land, and I thought it was a useful way to illustrate how terrifying and uncomfortable the law can be. Because just because we're in absurdo land doesn't mean we have to be for the discussion at hand. We don't have to go there.
I agree with you 100%. But the problem is
why are you bringing up absurdo land as a problem?
Because the defenses of Donald Trump are absurdo land. That's the issue. If we wanted to have an argument of was George W. Bush in good faith utilizing the EPA from the
basically starting with, well, he's wrong because I decided he was wrong, and that makes everything he says absurd. And as silly as Justice Alito declaring himself king of the universe.
That Congress gave Bush, or is Biden truly enforcing the border like Congress? Those are interesting questions. I find it wholly uninteresting to think, does the ex-president of the United States have infinite protection from all criminal prosecution if he was attempting through multiple, obviously immoral, most likely illegal means, yet to be decided, ways to circumvent the electoral process? Well, maybe the president should have that authority. That's an absurdo land question. That's in the same realm as Alito writing himself to be the leader of the world, and as Pelosi leading the House to say that the Senate is abolished, and as the president saying, I can kill someone on 5th Street and get away from it because I can't be prosecuted for a crime because I thought they were a national defense issue. Like, I think it's all absurdo land here. Yeah,
I know you do. It's clear that you do, but you said something that I just gotta go ahead and drop in on.
It.
You said circumventing the election. At no point does Trump ever circumvent any electoral process.
But he tries to.
Everything he asks people to use their authority to do a thing, and they don't do it.
He asks people.
They have the authority to do it, and he says, "I think you should do this because I see this, and here's my reasoning for it." And they go, "Nah, fam," and they don't do it. And then what happens on the 20th? He leaves.
Does the cop have the authority to arrest somebody?
Cops have the authority to cause.
Yeah. If I go to a cop and I say, "Hey, arrest that guy. I just saw him murder 15 people." Am I okay to do that because the cop has the authority to do that? Or am I in trouble because I just told a lie?
Here's the thing.
Tell me. Okay, talk out of this one. Yeah.
It's a completely different scenario.
Okay.
You're making a false police report. You are trying to deprive someone of civil rights based on a falsity.
That's what the indictment about Trump rests on. If it is the case, I think we both agree with it. We can both agree with this. If it comes out in court, if Trump is able to prove that he actually did think all of these things were true, then like 80% of these indictments.
No, because you need to start with an assumption that he believes it's true and then prove that he did not. You're starting that he has to prove something. It's a criminal indictment. The presumption is in his favor.
Fall off the map. If he really did think that he was making true claims, it's possible that like a ton of these just fall completely off the map.
See, using a false analogy like this is frustrating because you're trying to equate the two acts.
Okay.
If the person believed that a person just killed 15 people in front of them because they saw them drop a bag, right? And the bag, and they saw them drop a bag and run off to a different area. And then a bomb goes off and 15 people die. You go, "Hey, I saw that guy drop a bag. Could have had a bomb in it. That's the guy. I think that's the guy, right?" Police goes to arrest that guy. Wasn't that guy. His bag was innocuous. He dropped it because he had to run and take a piss. I don't know. Whatever reason he dropped it. That's not a fraud. That's not a false statement to the police. Even though you're wrong, he makes the claim. And he has, at that point, a reasonable purpose to making the statement. You presume Trump has no reasonable purpose.
Correct.
Probably because you don't like Trump.
Or it's because of the 150 some statements that have been recorded of people saying this claim is false, and then Trump repeating the claim.
Just conveniently support your position that you don't like Trump.
It also is conveniently supported that of the 62 cases he filed, 61 were tossed out, 11 by federal judges that he appointed. It's also convenient that William Barr, the sword and shield of Donald Trump, also turned against him and said it was all bullshit. It's also convenient that every single lawyer in his old counsel seems to be testifying against him and not backing up. It also seems to be the case that Giuliani has admitted that some of the claims that he made, especially the ones in Georgia, were literally just lies, but it was a First Amendment right to make them. It's also convenient that Tucker Carlson, there's a million things that are just convenient on my side. Now you're alleging some much grander thing that you have no evidence under oath for, or no evidence at all for. But I mean,
I'm not alleging anything.
Well, you're alleging that Donald Trump had good reason to believe these things with no.
I didn't say good reason to believe. I just said he can have a genuine good faith belief that election fraud occurred, and he can pursue it to the maximum within his authority. And I think he did.
What constitutes What constitutes genuine good faith?
If you believe something, go for it. You're asserting he doesn't believe it.
Yes.
You've said that multiple times.
Yes.
Well, then I will assert he does.
Okay.
There you go.
Then I would ask you, what is your evidence for it?
He says he believes it.
So if someone says they believe it, that's sufficient evidence to ascertain that they do believe it?
Prove to me they didn't.
Is that how that works? If for an affirmative defense or whatever, if I'm in court and I say, well, I thought that guy was going to kill me, do I automatically get off it?
It's not affirmative defense.
You have to prove
that
he doesn't believe it. Like, that is actually Jack Smith's burden.
That is the burden, of course. And the burden are the 100-some statements and all of the other people telling him. But I'm curious, and I know you have to go because I don't want to, I'm just curious for you. What would you have to see besides like a confession to think that Donald Trump was lying when he was pursuing voter fraud? What would it take for you to say, like, oh, okay, he probably didn't believe any of this shit?
A confession.
That's the only thing that would.
You have to have a statement that beyond any reasonable doubt leads you to the conclusion that he didn't believe it.
Is there any other mens rea criminal conviction that requires a confession to prove the state of mind?
I said confession in response to you asking for a confession.
Well, I'm saying besides a confession, because everybody says, well, a confession, obviously.
Any statement that leads you beyond a reasonable doubt to the conclusion that they don't believe it.
What would what would like a statement be?
I don't know. It's tough to build those cases. That's why these things
It's
are really
not
hard
tough to build those cases. We prove criminal convictions all the time in the United States without a person saying, like, I am doing this criminal act, and I know it's a criminal act. We do that all the time, don't we?
Easy to do it, though?
I think it happens all the time. I mean, it's not easy. It's criminal
does
court.
Does that make it easy?
Well, when you've got a person that lies and talks to literally every single person admitting to criminal behavior constantly, like the Mar-a-Lago case, I mean, it kind of is easy. I guess it depends, but I guess we'll see in court, I guess, huh?
We might not, because he might be immune to it.
True. Okay. Well, hey, listen, it's fun shouting at you. Hope you didn't, I like the fighting. It's fun.
It's easy. You want to further restrain the powers of the president subject to losing his office, call a constitutional convention and get an amendment passed. That would be a nice thing to see.
I love talking to you, man.
I'd want a national.
I enjoy it. I know a bunch of the audience is super mad at me. Guys, I got to tell you, this guy's great, and you should listen to him. He's very smart, and he reasons through stuff. But you have a lot of problems that people aren't talking to you about with all of these prosecutions. You have a lot of problems that people aren't talking to you about with the application of the 14th Amendment, which we didn't even get to. You have a lot of problems with whether a president is acting within or without of his purview, or whether it matters, with conflicts of plenary authority versus criminal processes, which is going to come up also in the stolen documents case from Mar-a-Lago, which you just mentioned, whether or not a president has to declassify anything.
Well, I don't think that's even relevant to the Mar-a-Lago case, right?
Yeah, of course it is. But
because a lot of those charges are like obstruction and stuff like that, whether he thought it or not, and retention of national defense secrets, which even if he declassified them wouldn't matter. But I understand the whole other thing.
Maybe.
Right.
But anyway, there's a lot of considerations and a lot of power that is just unexplored and undiscussed. And the media oversteps all of the questions when they talk about it. And so this is fun, but the questions are bigger than these discussions. And really challenge yourselves on it. Don't let your love or hatred of any politician get you there. I find it all funny. I want to see what happens. I don't care if Donald Trump goes to prison forever. I really don't. I just think that the exploration of executive power is the most interesting thing that's happened in my lifetime. So
I agree.
Let's see. All right, guys. Catch y'all later. Thanks, buddy.
Yeah, thanks a lot for coming by. Have a good one. Bye.
Oh, wow. So there you go. I got saved 6 minutes here. All right. I was starting to zone out at the end there. I'm not going to kid you. Woo! I really wish he just would have said detrimental reliance right at the outset. It said there are 5 elements to every fraud case. One of them is detrimental reliance. If you don't have detrimental reliance, it cannot, as a matter of law, be fraud. So stop with all your fraud talk, fraud. It cannot be fraud without detrimental reliance. It is impossible for anyone to have detrimentally relied on something which doesn't have the signature of the governor, doesn't have the state seal, doesn't have the signature of the Secretary of State. And if they wrote whatever they wrote, much like me saying, hey, I'm Donald Trump. Hey, everybody, I'm Donald Trump with like the worst Trump impression ever. And I'm facing Jack Smith. If you love me and you want to see democracy stand, you need to send me $100. Much like that cannot possibly be fraud. So too, nothing that those electors did could possibly be deemed fraud. Impossible. But as a matter of law, it would be dismissed as a matter of law, which is why no one's brought it up. No one brought it up. No, that's why I ain't been charged for fraud. Because Jack Smith knows this. Well, anyhow, we've been at this for 3.25 hours. It is time for me to sign off. Tell you all, make sure that no matter what you do, that you stay happy and eat the bugs. I'm going to be wrapping up pretty quickly. On Tuesday, I will be live streaming the DC Circuit Court's oral arguments on one of the issues that they were talking about in tonight's debate, such as, is there presidential immunity when he's acting within the scope of his presidency, within the penumbra of his presidential duties? Yeah, I use penumbra right there in a sentence. Me and Roe v. Wade, we're the only 2 people who ever figured out how to use penumbra in a sentence. I urge you to join me for that, and make sure you like, subscribe, share, send it all around, and of course, stay happy and eat the bugs. I hope the rest of your weekend is phenomenal, and Godspeed.